Bon dia, alegria, and welcome to your Dead by Daylight Bedtime Coffin Slime. I decided to create this video in the hopes of making a truly comprehensive and complete, as of this recording at least, video encapsulating everything related to the All Kill chapters, both the original and the newest comeback. This project came about because I absolutely love Dead by Daylight with all of my heart. And not only is finding comprehensive compilations of everything from any given chapter lore-wise quite difficult, but the bedtime lore reading niche is practically non-existent. This video will focus primarily on purely the lore aspects of the chapters. If you're looking for how to perform some epic trick shots with Trickster's blades, or which perks run best on him, I'm afraid this might not be the video for you. This will include a chronological lore I've assembled, not only from the base and tome lores, but from the descriptions of outfits, in-game events, add-ons, perks, and just about anything else where any potential lore can be found. I've attempted to include the more important of the non-base lore descriptions, where I believe they would have taken place. Some of these, such as lore from when a character was in high school, are easier to place, whereas other pieces of lore, which take place during a more vague time frame, are up for interpretation. Behavior themselves like to play it loose in regards to their own canon, and often contradicts themselves. So if there are any minor mistakes in regards to exact placement in the timeline, then I apologize in advance. Having said that, I believe this to be as close to a fully comprehensive lore view of the chapters as is possible. Furthermore, while I have compiled for myself every single potentially relevant lore item in the game, not everything is worth mentioning. For example, an outfit detailing a story of how a song was written is obviously worth mentioning and will be covered. However, outfits with descriptions such as "she kinda liked the purple hair" will be considered unimportant for obvious reasons. I'd also like to apologize in advance if I inevitably butcher any of the pronunciations. There's a lot of Korean here, and unfortunately I'm not a local. Before we can talk about their fates in the fog, we have to first discuss their humble origins. Our story begins before the dazzling lights and the 14-hour rehearsals, before any world tours or albums or grisly murders. Our story tonight starts not with the Trickster, but with his producer, a woman known professionally as Magnum Opus, but to her friends as Yun-Jin Lee. Yun-Jin had, as a small child, been enamored with the world of sound right from the get-go. Using whatever she could find, she would tap out rhythms and mimic playing the drums, or play notes at random on her family's piano. From the moment she had begun to walk and talk, it was evident to those who knew her that she was destined for great things, a life in a musically fulfilled world. But, as she reached the age of 10, her family collapsed under the weight of one of the most persistent epidemics plaguing South Korea: debt. Since her birth, Yun-Jin's parents had provided for her and her 4-year-old sister. They had never wanted for anything. But as the bills piled up, it became an inevitability that even the hardest of workers lived paycheck to paycheck. It was no surprise to anyone when the time finally came where Yun-Jin's family was unable to make their monthly payments in time. The creditors took everything her family owned, from her musical instruments to the very home she was raised in. She learned at a young age what it was like to lose everything, to see the people she loved suffer because of a pointlessly unjust world. As her world crumbled around her, there was nothing she could do except hold her little sister as she cried. The girls moved into a small, windowless birdcage of an apartment with their parents. You'd have been forgiven for doubting whether the children even had parents, given how little time they spent at home, although this was through no real fault of their own. Both her mother and her father had to work day and night in order to pay off their relentlessly increasing debt. Yun-Jin became the de facto caretaker of her younger sister in their physical absence, and it taught her at a young age just what it was like to have to guide and support someone else. It wasn't a thankless job, however. Seeing her sister smile and flourish in spite of the circumstances made the days worth it. At night, in their shared bedroom, she would sing songs of better times until they both fell asleep. It was in this dingy bedroom that she created her first ever rudimentary music tracks on what little equipment she could afford. After long, tiring days at prep school, she would come home and engulf herself in her music, imagining herself upon a stage of bright, blinding lights, where she was safe, loud, and free. That was what pop music meant to her. Something that could set her free. An unapologetic release of everything within her. It was the possibility of a better life, if only she were given a chance. But she knew that chances weren't given in this life. They were taken. As she grew up and entered her teenage years, you'd have been hard-pressed to find someone more studious and hard-working than Yun-Jin. Even so, there came a day when a rumor of an upcoming street concert reached her ears. There was no way her parents would ever be able to afford to get her tickets for a real concert, so this was her only way, her only chance, of ever experiencing the world of idols in person. Her studies be damned, she wouldn't miss it for the world. Skipping classes for the day, she found herself submerged in a sea of adoring fans, all surrounding the flashy performance. She saw up close for herself the idol in her element, tipping her cap and flourishing her jacket. The outfit seemed almost as if it were adorned by the night sky itself, and Yun-Jin felt envy. There was little in the world that she wouldn't have given for it to be herself up there, the object of adoration of thousands. The evening went on, and the concert ended. The noise died down, and the crowds dispersed, and only Yun-Jin remained. She lingered, as if by not leaving, she somehow wouldn't have to go back home, back to her own reality away from the spotlight. As she turned 17, her mother would gift her with a brooch in the shape of a magpie, informing her that it would bring her good luck and good fortune. But what fortune had Yun-Jin ever had to begin with? As she recalled her difficult childhood, she would roll her eyes and, once her mother had left, quickly stuff the trinket into a jewelry box to be forgotten about. However, coincidence or not, her fortune did indeed turn, as not long after her birthday, the world-renowned record label Mighty One decided to use her school as a scouting ground. Auditions were held, and few people were more desperate to be noticed than Yun-Jin. She auditioned for a spot as an idol trainee. The prospect of long hours and intense daily training didn't put her off in the slightest. In her eyes, there was no cage possibly smaller or more crushing than the one she already found herself in. Despite her best efforts, however, at the end of the day, it was simply a numbers game. Her competitors were in the hundreds, and to an extent, her best efforts didn't matter. Her fate would be decided on the whim of the talent scout, and Lady Luck did not shine on her. Despite not being chosen for the idol trainee spot, however, something about her did indeed stand out to the scout. She was offered an unpaid internship at the studio, a profitless, thankless position of which she gained very little materially. It was still a proposition she couldn't afford to turn down. In the years that would follow, as she grew into a young professional, Yun-Jin was responsible for some of the label's biggest and most successful hits. Despite this, she received no credit and no praise. After it became apparent that the acknowledgement she deserved wasn't going to be given to her, it dawned on her that she would need to go out and seize it for herself. She would begin to put a plan together. From now on, she would only appear in public with flashy, eye-catching colours and shapes, making herself impossible to ignore. Now, whenever she would produce a new music track, she would make sure to tag them in some way, discreetly or not, with the name that would become infinitely more well-known than her own, magnum opus. It was a name true to herself, its meaning being that of which is an artist's highest quality body of work. In that fashion, she guaranteed that every song and every album that she produced was always her new magnum opus. The only way to the top, of course, was by making sure every step you took was always one above the last. It wouldn't take long at all for people to start noticing her, and within time, she developed a fan base entirely of her own. Each new magnum opus song was received with more acclaim than the last, both critically and with the fans. Mighty One could see the writing on the walls and offered her a chance to prove her worth on another level. The K-pop band No Spin had been underperforming for some time now, and few executives wanted anything to do with it. On the verge of disbanding, Yun-Jin was tasked with giving the band that special magnum opus touch. Her ear for the unorthodox was the only chance the band had. Listening to their discography was a chore, their music too safe and commercial to make an impact in the music industry. It was no wonder to her that they were floundering. She knew that what the band needed was revitalization, and the way to go about that was with a fresh, new member to shake things up. Adding her own rogue element would allow her to directly inject her special lifeblood into the band. Through her contacts within talent-finding agencies, it wouldn't take long for her to discover the raw, edgy sound of a young man known as Ji-Woon. It was to be a meeting that would bring her to both heights and hells she could never have dreamt of. Unlike the world-famous K-pop idol he would become, Ji-Woon had his own humble beginnings. His family owned a restaurant, and while he never wanted for anything, they were hardly swimming in cash either. During Ji-Woon's early years, while he had an affinity for music, he was the polar opposite image of the man he would become. A timid and quiet boy, in school he feared being called on, being seen, or having to speak. But at the age of 7, that would begin to change. His class would hold a show and tell, a day to bring in your favorite thing and show the world just what you loved about it. Ji-Woon would bring his recorder with him. Sitting at the back of the classroom, in addition to his usual anxieties, today he also felt a charge of excitement, a courage which he normally lacked. The boy presenting before him had brought his pet hamster, which was clearly the class's favourite thing thus far. Students and teacher alike fawn over the tiny creature as it chirps and squeaks and wriggles around. But Ji-Woon pays this no mind. His fingers go through the motions of the notes he's going to play, then goes over them again and again, until he's sure he could play it blindfolded. The teacher absent-mindedly called him forward, his turn to perform having arrived, and the young boy shuffled awkwardly to the centre of attention. His sweaty, trembling fingers find their places on the recorder, and he inhales an anxious breath. The first notes are light, whimsical, wispy. He closes his eyes, and his fingers move in the same pattern he's moved them 100 times before, hitting each note with all the ease in the world. The hamster continues to squeak, a small irritation in his harmony, but he drowns it out, playing louder. The recorder's sound carries through the classroom naturally, as if the music were playing itself. With one final, soul-piercing note, he allows his lips to curl into a smile and opens his eyes. Any brief possibility of lightness within him was extinguished in this moment, and the twinkle in his eye died instantly. His smile fell. No one was watching him. No one had been listening to him, hearing what his music had to say. Instead, everyone in the room, including the teacher, was huddled around the small rodent. The creature continued to squeak incessantly, and the children laughed and awed over its every movement. Ji-Woon's face remained blank as he joined the crowd, no one so much as noticing or caring that his performance had finished. Instead, they passed the hamster around between them, taking turns petting and stroking it. After not long, the hamster would find itself pressed into Ji-Woon's palms. He took it in both hands, and with one steady movement, he squeezed. There was a squeal, then a crunch, then nothing at all. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, children started to scream. Ji-Woon had felt nothing at all. The following year, now 8 years old, Ji-Woon sat upon his father's shoulders, looking over a sea of human bodies. An elaborate stage is before him, illuminated by dozens of colored spotlights. A man in gaudy, audacious clothing stands before the crowd, mouth to the microphone. On each side is a guitarist, and behind him, a drummer. There was a crash of sound, beautiful, rhythmic music, a voice that twisted delicately through the melody. His father shouted something up towards him, but he couldn't hear. He shouted again. "This is what you'll do. This is where your talent will take you," he roared above the cries of the crowd and the rumble of the speakers. Ji-Woon felt a tingle run through his spine as he saw the spectacle of the concert with new eyes. It was like waking up without having ever known you were asleep. What he saw was something incredible. Everyone absorbed and enraptured by the sound of one single man. The emotions of thousands are guided by the melodies emanating from within him. The power he holds with his mere vocals was rivaled by none. He was seen by all, he was loved, and he was wondrous. After this, Ji-Woon never played the recorder again. He knew now that what he wanted was a different kind of attention. He didn't want to just be appreciated for being skilled at something. He wanted to be adored. He wanted to elicit emotions, the stronger the better. And he didn't want to share that spotlight. From then on, even at his young age, he started working and performing at his father's restaurant, under the guise of wishing to allure more customers. His father bought him a set of throwing knives, the very first of which the boy would treasure for years to come, and he took to them like a duck to water. These performances were masterful, self-taught tricks and shows using throwing knives, a custom of which he gleefully tricked ignorant foreigners into believing was a classic cultural South Korean tradition. Foreigners who were more than willing to part with their cash. It would appear to the audience as if the knives with which he performed were extensions of himself, for how naturally he appeared to hit the most wild of trick shots, with seemingly so little difficulty. Whenever the restaurant found itself most packed, and the waitress scrambled around taking orders left and right, Ji-Woon would never miss an opportunity to share a little of his spotlight, even if only for his own amusement. The crowd went absolutely wild, as Ji-Woon, seemingly unprompted, would suddenly direct one of the throwing knives directly towards the waitress. With microseconds to react, and no warning, she would miraculously raise her serving tray with a yelp in the nick of time. The restaurant would cheer and roar, and Ji-Woon would prompt her to give a performatory bow. The audience, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to seeing what would have, at least in their eyes, been a breathtakingly tragic accident. As he continued his restaurant performances, his father used the extra money they were now earning to pay for vocal and dancing lessons for his son. He loved him dearly and desperately wanted him to succeed in something he clearly had such potential for, pushing him to achieve a fame most people could never dream of. Ji-Woon did not disappoint. As he grew from a young boy into a young man, he would practice and produce his own crude music. His most notable success, if you could call it that, was an underground single he produced titled On Target, which would go on to become a collector's item that only the most fanatical could procure. Still, even someone with his well-practiced talent found great difficulty making any progress at all. Dozens of auditions with dozens of faceless nobodies would come and go, and very little seemed to change for him, a frustration that grew as time went on. It was a stroke of sheer luck that up-and-coming Mighty One producer Yun-Jin Lee was reportedly attempting to reform the washed-up boy band No Spin, and had singled him out as she seemed to see in him what so many others missed. When he discovered she would be one of the judges at his next audition, he made sure to not disappoint. His performance was nothing short of breathtaking. His combination of intense athletic skill and precise marksmanship that would make a royal archer blush were all that Yun-Jin needed to know that he was the spark of lightning that would revitalize No Spin. As Ji-Woon took the talent show by storm, Yun-Jin would notice a pair of magpies circling the stage, their dark feathers shimmering in the glitz and glam of it all. Later that night, after several hours of socializing and networking with her fellow peers, and after making sure she had secured exclusive rights to have the boy be guided under her training program, she searched her room for her old jewelry box. Inside it, as had been the case for many years now, was the old magpie brooch her mother had gifted her. After all these years, she clipped it to her jacket, feeling a newfound sense of clarity, an optimism for the future. She wasn't one for superstition, nor had coincidence changed anything for her. And yet, a little extra luck surely couldn't hurt. Yun-Jin's mother had failed to provide her with a great many things in life, through little fault of her own. However, perhaps her mother had gifted her with just a large enough sprinkle of good fortune to have turned the tables entirely. Not even 24 hours had passed after the show before Ji-Woon was on his way to a dormitory in Seoul, having accepted the offer of being taken into Yun-Jin's training program, where he was to spend 14 hours a day, every day, being sculpted into the ultimate star. Ji-Woon had his talents, but locally sourced singing and dancing lessons could only take you so far, even with his own added extra flair. He would be handcrafted into becoming something desirable, an object to manipulate and please the masses, being taught how to sing and move his body in ways he previously had thought impossible, and how to carry himself with the right balance of confidence and modesty. There would not be an ounce of fat not meant to be there, not a single hair out of place, and not a single inch of room for mistakes of any kind. The process drained him like nothing he had ever known, and he saw his peers drop out like flies. It wasn't your regular Joe that would just up and become a worldwide superstar. He knew that all the pain was but a mere reflection of his transformation into something truly beautiful. Just as it felt like it might never end. As if perhaps perfection were truly unattainable by any mortal man. He was accepted. No Spin was relaunched with Ji-Woon as its newest member, and within hours of publication, their first music video was a viral sensation. Their debut single, Cut Through You, hit the top of the Korean music charts within days. Ji-Woon's vocals, "Can't stop this love that's tearing your heart. Wherever you go, I will cut you apart," were praised for their evocative and thrilling sounds, dangerous and far removed from the bland majority of boy band music for the times. Their following songs were hits each bigger than the last. The song "I'll Be Waiting For You" captivating heartbroken youths across the nation. The lyrics, "Don't run away, don't say we're through, no way to escape this, I'll be waiting for you," resonated through the country to fans both young and old. Fame was almost immediate. Ji-Woon lived in a daze of interviews and adoration, and though the frenzied schedule exhausted his bandmates, he was invigorated. Each day that passed was an affirmation that he was greater than the mediocrity that society spewed out. That he was here for a purpose, to create things with melodies only he could hear. Their music was both endearing and controversial, their lyrics slicing through crowds in the tens of thousands, each single and album being more popular than the last. You couldn't turn on the radio without having your ears blasted with the new and edgy sound of No Spin. And that wasn't just the case for South Korea, but quickly the entire world. Their merchandise ranged far and wide from everything you could think of, from collaborations with fizzy drink brands to pillows and cushions with their faces and brand on them. As Yun-Jin had anticipated, and indeed desired, their music had gone from commercially safe and dull to experimental and hard-hitting. Yun-Jin herself became somewhat of a living legend overnight. Producers and CEOs and executives all vied for her attention. Money began flowing through her accounts like water through a burst dam, and she made sure to dress for the occasion. Her hair colors were eccentric and changed monthly, as did the colors and fabrics of her dresses and coats and skirts, becoming ever more lush and flamboyant as the days went by. Magnum opus stayed true to her name and made sure that everything she did, be it in the band or in her personal life, was the best she had ever done it thus far. The penthouse she bought for herself made her childhood home look like an animal crate. And the view she had of Seoul was to die for. Whatever you imagine a person could want for, could spend a lifetime working to have, Yun-Jin had 100 and more to spare. As the brains behind the fame, she would also find herself, on many occasions, behind the camera. A topic of frequent discussion in the endless seas of interviews, one single in particular gained notoriety for being particularly against the grain. Yun-Jin would often find herself having to defend the song, aptly named Tortured Souls, asking for listeners to hear past the hardcore sounds and see the true meaning behind the lyrics, repeatedly explaining that the song was about the dirty little secrets that everyone kept hidden from their daily life. Interviewers would often ask her whether she believed the song crossed a line, and Yun-Jin would always reply in turn, stating simply that there was nothing wrong with a little bit of fantasy, and that the sounds would resonate with anyone just trying to be themselves. She would say these things with a dark twinkle in her eye, as if she had more to divulge, secrets within the lyrics that only she had the keys to. That was the way that Yun-Jin wanted it. the more mystique, the more no-spin refused to leave your mind, the better. Producing a song is one thing. Producing the mystique behind it is another entirely. It was all the better that Ji-Woon had been a complete unknown outside of those who knew the once little boy from his restaurant. No known past meant an infinite wealth of possibilities. Who was this young man with such a sharp edge to both his smile and his blades? Their popularity was at their peak when the band were invited to perform as the headliners for the Fire Moon Festival, attended and enjoyed by people of all ages. It felt as if the music would never stop, and the sound would travel forever. But over time, the champagne grew stale. Adoration would only take you so far. Ji-Woon eventually began to see exactly how his fans viewed him, and what he saw was their joy and envy split 5 ways, thinned out between each band member. Like squeaking hamsters, impeding his musical gift from being truly appreciated and heard. The validation that had surged through him left a desperate yearning for more. Ji-Woon kept up impressions, mimicking a charm that had long since been buried under loathing. It was the end of the summer now, with the beginnings of a chilly autumn brewing, and Mighty One and No-Spin were about to discover just quite why it was said that the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. Ji-Woon recorded the second No-Spin album with his bandmates, never missing a beat. He played the part he had been molded into, without so much as a crack in the exterior. But inside he smoldered. It sickened him, feeling the envy his own fans felt for him, for his bandmates. Having to vie for attention with mediocre at best artists, being shackled to them. From the moment he had been scouted, it had been transparent to everyone that it was him lifting the rest of them up, and that without him, they would have faded into obscurity and disgrace. These were the thoughts going through his head as he had his low-calorie, low-carbohydrate, low everything lunch. These thoughts of envy took up his headspace even more so after having to put on a performance of joviality and camaraderie the entire morning, and he realized he was almost late for the beginning of their afternoon recording session. He sauntered back through the halls to the recording studio, his nose picking up the scent of smoke? Fire? The burning of electricity, campfire smells miles from any campfires. An alarm blared, and his legs moved before his mind, rushing for the control room. The scent was unmistakable now. Burning wires, which had long since passed the point of being put out, the sparks having quickly ignited the heavily flammable furniture and walls, and had evidently already been burning for a few minutes at the very least. Reaching the control room, he momentarily assumed it had already been evacuated, and would have made to leave were it not for muffled cries coming from behind the door of the booth. A pair of large speakers lay splayed out in front of it, impeding the already heavy and soundproof door from opening. His bandmates pounded desperately on the door, drumming out their own pleading rhythm for salvation, their cries mingling with the crackling of the flames. Instinctively, Ji-Woon made to move the speakers, heavy but not impossible to maneuver away from the door, grabbing one and stopping. As he felt the heat rising and the smoke thickening, and the sweat on his brow beginning to drop, he realized what he was being given. A gift by fate. Yes, that had to be it. The universe knew too that the true beauty could only be created once unshackled from that which weighed it down, once all that diluted it was purified. If it were to be purified by fire, then so be it. Each breath he took was a conscious, deliberate process requiring all of his attention. The cry so close, yet so far away. The spitting of the flames threatening to overtake them. Until he backed away. That was when he heard it. They were screaming his name as they burned. Screaming for him to save them. Ji-Woon! Ji-Woon! Hak Ji-Woon! It was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. When the fire crew finally arrived, his tears were genuine. Autumn came fast, and as with the last truly hot sunset of every summer, so did Yun-Jin's entire world begin to fade away too. She stood alone in the park near her apartment, her attire simple and discreet, quiet, unlike the persona she had spent several years building up for herself in public. As it stood, she was not magnum opus, but Lee. Just Lee. She watched as the red and yellow leaves blew in the wind, and felt the air lightly caress her face, her neck covered by several layers of a warm scarf, and found herself grateful for the falling temperatures and the crisp chill of the air. Fields of flowers, hues of blues and purples and violets, greeted her weary eyes and granted her the permission to simply breathe. To take her mind momentarily off what she would never, ever be able to forget. Her ragged mind fought against the memories of the fire alarm going off, her disregard for the safety of anyone other than herself. Always ahead of the curve, always at the head of the pack, always one step ahead. That was how she had always viewed herself, 1 foot out the door at the scent of danger, leaving the unimportant staff workers behind to panic and flounder. It had only been after she emerged into the Seoul streets, electric soot burning her eyes and lungs, that she realized that no spin was nowhere amongst the coughing crowd now gathering at the fire exit of the building. She had watched the remaining few emerge, dwindling by the minute, until the flames became so great that even looking at them became unbearable. A Goliath of flames engulfed the building entirely, taking well into the night for the fire crews to finally put under control. A chill ran down her spine. This time, not from the cold winds. Maybe if she hadn't been so self-centered, so motivated by her desire for self-preservation, maybe she would have been able to do something. All over the news, on those first reports she'd seen, before she lost the stomach to watch anymore, they'd hailed Ji-Woon as a tragic hero, who had put his own life at risk to try and save his bandmates. His friends, all of whom had found fame and glory and family together. All gone, except for him. Gone, as was any prospect of a future for her. How could there be? She knew how the story went. She would be relegated to ghost stories and late-night shoddy documentaries about the once was, or could have been, band. An old hag who had her moment in the sun and had everything taken all too soon. Ji-Woon would still have his fans. He would be eternally adored and martyred as the guilt-ridden sole survivor of the accident. He wouldn't want for money or love, even if his day in the spotlight was over. In time, he could even mentor other younger idols on how to reach where he had once been. Perhaps further. Further. Another deep breath of the fresh autumn air. The flowers lazily waved at her. Her eyes remained on them as the sun momentarily reappeared from behind the ever-present clouds. The temporary rays of warmth illuminated their varying shades, appearing as if to give them a glow, a warmth. These flowers would soon be gone, the winter taking its toll, and it would only be with the coming of spring that their seedlings would spring up, the colour to once more cover the fields of the park. A spurring awoke from within her. Plants lived and died and lived again at the whims of nature. They rose with the sun and died with it too. There was no reasoning to be had, no opportunity for discussion. That was just how it was. When had Yun-Jin ever, in her entire life, considered herself to be anything even remotely akin to something as delicate and helpless as a flower? Who was she to let herself rot as the vultures picked at her courts? The fire was an event out of her control. Perhaps she could have done something. Perhaps her actions could have saved those lost in the fire. But her short-sightedness blinded her until it was too late. Was that to be it then? Would the sun simply never rise again for her? No. She would rise again and again. And what's more, she would do so far before these flowers did. She wouldn't allow herself to wallow in self-pity any further, and would not wait for some miraculous event to help her find a future fate. Magnum opus would stay true to her name, and take from the tragedy to create her next masterpiece. She allowed herself the rest of the sunset at the park to find peace. It would be the last rest she would get in a very long time. Unknown to Mighty One Entertainment, Yun-Jin created several new tracks to relaunch Ji-Woon's career. If there was to be a future for either of them, it would need to be one that embraced the past, both the highs and the lows. The pair experimented together, Yun-Jin pushing Ji-Woon further and further to tap into his grief and guilt in order to find true honesty in his melodies. The songs exploring the pangs, truly sudden, unstoppable loss. During these times, Yun-Jin made sure to keep him very much in the spotlight, parading him through scores of interviews and retrospectives and memorials, painting him as the tragic sole survivor of a completely unnecessary and untimely disaster. The time would come when they felt prepared to take the leap. It was now, more than ever, that would decide their fate. The world would say goodbye to No Spin and be introduced to the Trickster. The Trickster was supposed to encompass everything that No Spin had been, and then surpass it. The promise of a hopeful future in spite of pain and loss. A warm smile and a soft heart hidden under a flamboyant and extravagant outwards appearance. It was a name that was meant to inspire fear. If there was one thing you could undeniably say about him, it was that he was impossible to ignore. Adorned in various brightly colored coats, covered in necklaces and jewelry, with distinctly dyed hair, he was the sort of spectacle you couldn't help but gawk at. Even more unconventionally, in addition to his taste for throwing knives, he had now added a much larger instrument to his arsenal. A stylized, glowing, neon metal baseball bat. The tricks he could perform with a combination of all these things and his own athletic talent were a sight to behold. His debut single was a global phenomenon. Its universal themes of grief and guilt resonating internationally. His debut album, Edge of Revival, would reach heights that even No Spin had never reached. The standout of the album, a song entitled Whispers of Warmth, had lyrics which evoked imagery of the tragedy, so recent in people's minds, into an almost seductive tale. Your whisper on me, warm as can be, burning each breath till I can't breathe. His first national tour was a resounding success, the people of Korea flocking to him to come together in their shared grieving, to celebrate both what had come before and what was yet still to arrive. But with the birth of the Trickster persona, a darkness had come with it. An awakening, an enlightenment in Ji-Woon that needed to be acted upon. Those cries for mercy, for salvation, directed at him, they had been perhaps the only truly honest, truly beautiful pieces of art his bandmates had ever created. The facade of vulnerability and guilt he put on for the world was but a shadow of the true intense humanity his peers had demonstrated in their final agonizing moments. He had been given the gift of coming face to face with a rawness that was previously unknown to him, and he just had to see it again for himself. The Trickster chose his targets carefully and with a mixture of logic and instinct, aiming his sights on loners and bachelors, those who were less likely to be noticed when they disappeared, those less likely to be missed. His first victim was a college student who was attending a music course at university, whose voice had captivated Ji-Woon from the moment he'd heard him. Creeping into the young man's apartment under the cover of dusk, his clothes dark and discreet, he awoke the young singer with a baseball bat to the skull. It had been all over for the boy before he'd even had a chance to fight back. There are many who would consider attacking a sleeping innocent in the safety of their own home an act of a coward. However, Ji-Woon had little concern for what others would have thought. He had all the validation he needed already, after all. The trickster bound his arms and legs tightly, leaving no possible chance for escape, and forcefully gagged him with a balled-up rag, duct-taping it shut to keep it there. Now that the stage had been set, and he was ready to perform on his audience of one, the torture lasted long into the night, the young man being slowly vivisected as the hours drew on, feeling everything, despite his ever-worsening concussion from the blow to the head. It was an agony few people could ever deserve, and one that no one could endure. However, as the performance went on, as his blade sliced open tendons and flayed skin and punctured organs, there was something missing. A sound, a connection. He wanted nothing more than to be engulfing himself in his victim's wondrous voice as he cried for mercy, cried for his loved ones. And as he finally plunged his knife deep into his belly, gutting him like a fish at the market. But all he received were the muffled cries through the rag, like hearing a performance from the bathroom of a concert venue. He heard only the roughest outline of what should have been crystal clear. The trickster desired nothing more than to have his victim's screams wash over him, leaving the man to be eventually found by the authorities when he stopped showing up for classes and was reported missing. Ji-Woon knew, at the very least, that his disappointment had taught him something. That if he were to truly indulge himself in what he craved, what he was put on this earth to do, he would need to learn and adapt. He needed to set the stage himself, and what his stage needed was privacy. Victims would no longer be eviscerated in their beds, but abducted and taken somewhere their tortured melodies could be sung as loud as their lungs would allow. Somewhere that their emotions needn't be restrained. Further yet, it was no longer enough to just bask in these momentary ecstasies that he created in the moment. The trickster wanted to record these sounds and incorporate them into his music. He knew the general public would never be able to see what he saw in its purest form, but remixed and produced, he could disguise them and show the world sounds they had never had the luxury of experiencing before. Over the course of several victims, he investigated and discovered what body parts evoked what types of shrieks and screams. Stabbing the quadratus lumborum elicited a long, guttural wail, while slashing the carotid artery created a sound like a cat being strangled. Again and again, he could recreate the true human honesty only possible in moments of pure agony, in the moments before their death. Ji-Woon recorded each of his sessions synthesizing and working them into his songs, hiding them behind layers of melodies. He had never felt more accomplished, had never felt closer to true enlightenment. As he grew bolder, he began to leave hints for the police. For one of his victims, he draped a mink boa around their slashed neck, a fashion accessory that had been featured in one of his recent photo shoots. For the next killing, he removed a teeth from a man that a boxer in one of his music videos was without. Success and fame greeted the duo from every corner of the earth, and they toured as far and wide as their schedule could manage. Yun-Jin couldn't have asked for a more receptive audience. However, with every new city they visited, a series of eccentric murders followed in their wake. Coincidences at first, but how many coincidences are coincidences until they are no longer coincidences? The blood trail left in their wake disturbed Yun-Jin as she realized that not only were the murders following them, but that the victims' times of death would often coincide with their tour dates. After the tragedy that had befallen No-Spin, she would be taking no chances and ensured that the Trickster's security detail was second to none. She would not give fate the chance to put her at its mercy again. It seemed to her that there was a very real possibility that there was a serial killer following in their trail. Some unhinged fan fixated on the Trickster, and apparently inspired by his morbid songs. The thought made her shiver. The duo would tour the world for years on end, and the brutal killings followed in their wake. Their final international performance would take place in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. From the moment they touch down, Yun-Jin's mind is set to nothing but work. Despite a heavy fatigue from the long flight, she switches on her laptop and goes through the motions. Work cannot wait. In her mailbox, shuffled in between all of her work emails, are a series of messages from an unknown user addressing her by name. Few know her as Yun-Jin. To most of the professional and Trickster army, she was known only as Magnum Opus. She clicks on one of the emails at random. She regrets it immediately. Within the email is a sickeningly detailed account of someone's plan to murder both her and the Trickster. The email was signed by the Trickster's #1 fan. Death threats were a common occurrence for even the mildly famous. So for the longest time, she had simply ignored them as the pathetic pleas for attention that they were. This time, however, it was different. Not only had they addressed her by her real name, but attached to the email was a picture of her in the hotel's lobby, taken not even an hour ago. Her persona of confidence and strength could only bear so much. After the death of No-Spin, and as the murders seemingly followed her throughout the globe, she was reminded far too often that if someone wanted her dead, genuinely dead, then that's just what would happen. No one could be on guard at all times. No security detail was infallible. Her manicured hand trembles as she reaches for her phone. The threat is too serious to be ignored. She calls her security crew for an emergency meeting and imposes the following rule. Outings are restricted to recording sessions and concert rehearsals only. This meant no fun in the sun for anyone, unfortunately. But then again, you could hardly enjoy a day at the beach if you were dead. Furthermore, a personal bodyguard was to be assigned to both the Trickster and herself at all times, rotating in shifts for around-the-clock protection. Everyone complies with these rules, except for one obvious and frustrating exception. The Trickster, who argued against being forced to stay on the hotel premises. This came as no surprise whatsoever to her. Her relationship with Popstar had been on the rocks for several months now. Every decision she makes, he challenges. His ego was growing out of control, and not even she could keep him in check. Her patience was being pushed to its limit. Not only did it repeatedly put their lives at risk, not to mention their careers, but because of their frequent creative disagreements, their next album was not only behind schedule, but now she was forced to produce 3 new songs on top of overseeing his tour. Someone needed to rein in this rabid dog with a leash. At her request, all company phones had been installed with a tracking GPS application. No one outside of herself and her chief security expert were aware of this. If the Trickster keeps testing her patience and disobeying her, then this would come in handy indeed. It was for his own good and hers. Down at the recording studio, Yun-Jin pours herself another cup of coffee, stifling a yawn. Her temples are throbbing. The jet lag was hitting her hard. It was bad enough having to adjust to one time zone once, but she was having to do so repeatedly every few weeks. Sleep was hard to come by as it was. The insomnia further aggravated by the looming threat of crazed fans, potentially breaking in and murdering her while she slept. On the way back to her booth, she notices that the studio next to hers is occupied. Out of curiosity, she takes a peek inside. A young man is laughing in the recording booth. She recognizes the superficial potential immediately. The man having a sort of easygoing smile that she could see selling thousands of magazines. At the mix table sits a man she recognizes, Alano Muse, a semi-famous producer from San Diego. They were both far from their homes. What could he be doing in Rio, for all places? She decides that some fresh gossip will complement her cup of coffee just nicely. She raps on the door's window, and the door creaks open. He remembers her, of course. Who could forget the magnum opus? She invites herself in as he plays the track that he's working on. To her ears, it was nothing special, and even aggravated her somewhat. The bass line was low and predictable as it built upwards. It was formulaic, too safe to be of any interest to her. Just as she decides that she'll listen to the rest of it out of politeness and then excuse herself, an ethereal voice fills the room. Yun-Jin almost spills her coffee. The artist's voice is crystalline. His range powerful, yet nuanced. Who is that? Alano speaks with Lukasz, the young artist, over the intercom, and tells him to drop his pitch down a notch. This baffled her. The track should be building up to push the young man's range, instead of confining it to a boring, generic sound. What a waste of such potential. It stirs something inside of her she hasn't felt since her early days with the Trickster. A passion to bring out the best in others. As the song ends, she walks up to Lukasz and hands him her business card. Contact me when you're ready to become a serious artist. Before she's even left the door, a pang of regret hits her. She had said those exact words to the Trickster many years ago. Back then, she had looked forward to working with him. Those days are long gone. Later that night, she sits at the hotel bar, taking a sip of her wonderfully cold caipirinha, the sugar liquor smoothing the sour burst of lime. Why had she given that young artist, Lukasz, her business card? It wasn't exactly like she could produce him. Another pang of nostalgia. Another sip of caipirinha. She misses it. She longs for it, scouting new talents. That raw, creative chaos of designing a bold new sound, rebelling against the norms of the musical world, maybe succeeding, maybe failing, but always creating something genuinely new. The adrenaline rush of releasing a new first album. Things were different for her now. Her time was split two ways between handling the Trickster's ever-growing ego and following an ever more generic, endless production cycle. Was this the cost of succeeding? Producing music that makes her cringe? Not to mention, as is ever present at the back of her mind, being threatened by crazed, psychotic fans, and having all the arguments that came with trying to enforce bodyguards and curfews. Why did the Trickster seem so desperate to seemingly get himself killed? Just to spite her? Her life now was so different from what she had imagined as a little girl. Her thoughts returned to childhood and the endless possibilities of where she could have ended up. She recalled the small, dingy apartment she had been in with her little sister. So many years ago now. When music had been a luxury that helped her escape the mundanity of her real life. She realizes now, at the end of the day, she had never really escaped the cage she'd been born in. She'd just exchanged an iron cage for a golden one. It wasn't as if she had always felt like this. Those early days of becoming magnum opus, of risking it all to relaunch No Spin, and helping to create the fearfully loved Trickster identity, forged from the flames of the studio fire. But it was stale now. And what did she have to show for it? An ungrateful pop star and a serial stalker. she downs the caipirinha in one go. The bartender looks over at her, and she gives a "keep 'em coming" nod. It didn't matter to her that it was maybe spurred on by the alcohol. She needed something to change, and she needed that to be unconditional. She calls a Mighty One executive, asking for a group virtual meeting so she can give them the news. In her mind, it's as good as settled. Once she's finished with her 3 final tracks in Rio, she is done with the Trickster, and would instead move on to producing the launch of Trainees. There was nothing the newer generations could throw at her that she hadn't already been through with No Spin and the Trickster. A Mighty One executive cut her off before she could finish. Apparently, they had more urgent business to discuss. Damaging rumors had been trending online. Some disturbed, delusional fan claimed to have murdered someone at a Trickster concert. Her temples started throbbing again. Her fists clenched, her long manicured nails digging deep into her palms. Anything to keep her hands from shaking again. She promises to handle the issue, for her brand's sake, if nothing else. But after Rio, she is done with the Trickster. This was non-negotiable, and she didn't care what Mighty One thought. The rumors are worse than she could have imagined, and are treading on all corners of social media. An anonymous post claims that the victim was last seen alive at the Trickster's VIP meetup after his concert in New York earlier this year. Yun-Jin remembers the night well. Not because of the concert, but because of a detail that had been replaying in her mind ever since. Bleeding scratch marks on the Trickster's forearms when he showed up at the concert's after-party. The rumors online were rekindling the suspicion that she had silenced before. Years ago, the Trickster and she had arrived in Miami several days earlier than planned. Yun-Jin attended the networking events while the Trickster rehearsed. 3 days following their arrival, a folk singer was found dead downtown, near the bar where he performed. Security footage was released to the public, showing a man dressed in black with his face covered, leading the singer down an alley. The dark, blurry footage revealed little about the suspect, but Yun-Jin noticed a detail that twisted her stomach in knots. She recognized the gold-rimmed headphones around the suspect's neck, with 2 large X's, one for each ear. It was the brand new model of Scherch's 1050X headphones, which few audiophiles knew about, and even fewer could afford. She recognized the model right away, because the Trickster favored their equipment over other expensive models. He wore a similar pair on the plane to Miami, but then switched to a lesser model for the rest of the tour, which only fueled her doubts. Back then, however, she had not been in a good place. The death of No Spin had still been fresh in her mind, her grief palpable. Acute insomnia kept her mind in a haze, and the jet lag of the tour only worsened her state. In the end, she decided to let the police do their job and focus on hers. But now someone else was dead, someone whom the trickster might have been the last one to see alive. The headphones, the scratch marks, and the late nights out were details, coincidences. But they added up. How many coincidences does it take to know? A knock on the door makes her jump. The head of security is here, and Yun-Jin can smell the nervousness of him from a mile away. She follows her gut and confronts him, bluffing about firing the whole security crew if he doesn't come clean. She gets results, as the man cracks under the pressure immediately, learning that to her unfortunate unsurprise, the trickster had left the hotel premises last night. And while his bodyguard had attempted to tail him, he had lost him in the end. Yun-Jin pounds her fist on the table, needing to exert her frustrations on something. Why would he leave the hotel? Was going out clubbing truly worth risking his life for? Where was he going in a city completely foreign to him? And to do what? Despite working with the trickster for years, he felt like little more than a stranger to her at times. The immense wealth he generated came at a cost, a great cost. If the trickster's linked to a murder, then so is she. Even if there's no evidence, even if it's just rumors, it's her life and her entire career on the line. And if she knew one thing, just one thing, it was to know better than to trust someone in the industry. She needed to get answers before it was too late. Whatever the trickster was doing at night, she needed to find out, for better or for worse. She wouldn't know peace until she found out for sure. During the trickster's next rehearsal, she dismissed her security detail for the following hours. Thankfully, she was the only one with the authority to do so, as what she had in mind would require the utmost discretion and would not be strictly legal. Showing her VIP badge to the doorman, she slips into the trickster's changing room. What exactly she was looking for wasn't clear to her, but she knew that she needed to find something. Perhaps it would be in here that she could find a clue as to what the trickster is up to. Something unassuming that no one would bat an eye at except for someone explicitly looking. She flips through the flamboyant costumes and accessories, looking for anything to give her a lead. Notes, pictures, receipts. All she needed was one single concrete thing to give her even the faintest of ideas as to where to begin looking for her answers. All she finds is a gym bag. Inside lies a water bottle, a few spare t-shirts, and his wallet. Even that contains very little of interest, having no bills in it. Everything except for his hotel room keycard. She feels the frustration already beginning to build in her. Maybe she's looking in the wrong place. So lost in her frustration is she, that it takes her a moment to realize someone is approaching the door, chattering loudly with someone as they reach the door. In a split-second move, she snags the key card and returns the bag to how it had been when she came in, just as the trickster's assistant walks in. Her heart is pounding so loud in her chest, she fears the whole building can hear her. But she steels her resolve and keeps her expression impassive as she walks out. Whatever the assistant saw, or thinks she saw, she won't dare mention it. At least, not to anyone that matters. Making her way away from the room, not daring to pause until she was far from the scene of her snooping, she reached the Trickster's hotel room, key card in hand, knowing that if she does this, there was no turning back, one way or the other. Yet, if Trickster is hiding something, she needs to know what it is, before everyone else does, before it ruins her life. There can be no doubts in her mind. Slender fingers press against the door and push it open. The Trickster's room is tidy. You'd be forgiven for assuming it was unoccupied, were it not for the few personal items scattered around the room. She supposed it ended up that it seemed like he barely spent any time here, given he seemingly spent all of his spare time somewhere else. Her first instinct is to go through his luggage. She rifles through a pile of odd clothes, unlike anything she'd ever imagined him wearing. Simple, all-black hoodies and sweatpants, a black face mask. All things she's never seen him wear on tour. Or just about anywhere for that matter. There was a tap on the door, and her heart might as well have leapt from her throat, dropping the face mug instantly. "Room service!" exclaimed a cheery voice from the other side of the door. She asked them to come back later, in as casual of a tone as she could manage. Taking a deep breath of relief, trying to return her heart rate to normal, she calms herself and continues her search. To her dismay, despite ransacking every corner of the room, she finds nothing out of place. Except for a rare, top-of-the-line sampler on his bedside table. Not an item that was inherently out of place, but she was curious regardless. Intrigued, she took it in hand and pressed play. What greeted her made the bile in her stomach threaten to come up. A series of loud, violent, blood-curdling screams filled the room. The screeches sounded genuine. Were they samples from a horror film? Her mind instantly goes to the first, most rational explanation, regardless of whether she believes it or not. She needed that to be the case. But try as she might, she cannot fully dismiss the nagging, disturbing thought that this might be real. Whoever was on the other end was one hell of an actor if those were faked. There was some human instinct that told her she would know if they were from a horror flick. Terror, true terror, can't be reproduced without its source being genuine. She turns it off, a heavy silence filling the room. She knew she couldn't stop there and had to keep going. As she searched further, desperate for any explanation as for what she had just heard, all that she found only further enhanced her discomfort. A sharpening kit for knives, whetstones, and cleaning products. A whole collection of sharpeners. The Trickster used throwing knives in his performances, yes, but the vast majority were dulled to the point of only being useful for artistic purposes. You'd have been hard-pressed to cut open an apple with them, let alone anything else. A past conversation she had overheard at the recording studio forces itself into her mind, her subconscious telling her it was important. Lukasz, the young artist she had given her card to, introduced himself to the Trickster asking about the flamboyant knife in his hands. The trickster's knives were iridescent, glittering hues of pink and purple when hit with light. The trickster had replied, saying that he always keeps a blade on him. Yun-Jin picks up one of the whetstones. Why sharpen a stage prop? She was more than aware of Ji-Woon's history as a child, that he had used real knives to perform at his father's restaurant as a child. But such dangerous practices hadn't been a necessity for years now. The studio wouldn't have allowed it. This obsession of his with knives was not just for show. And what was the point of sharpening and maintaining a knife if not to use it? Ji-Woon has finished up with rehearsal and has decided he feels like taking a stroll. The sounds of Rio de Janeiro wash over him as he basks in the city life. Water splashes into a basin. A skateboard's wheels grind over asphalt. Crickets chirp as the evening orange sky begins to descend. And the voice, one singular, specific, ethereal voice. He knows the origin of the angelic melody coming from a nearby open window. The Brazilian trainee singer, Lucas. Ji-Woon thinks he's good. Nowhere near his own level, of course, but a diamond in the rough, which was about the highest level of praise anyone could possibly expect to receive from him. His voice is the brushstroke Ji-Woon has been searching for. To think, Lucas practically fell into his lap. The Brazilian man having sung at the same recording studio Yun-Jin had been visiting a few days prior. With Lucas's voice, Ji-Woon can create art. Genuine, agonizing art. From his silky, blood-curdling terror. It would be an art of higher quality and higher importance than anything the man would ever achieve by himself. That much was for sure. Ji-Woon had already prepared a warehouse at an abandoned harbor for tomorrow's act. It had been simple, as it always was. A mixture of cash and renown persuaded people to do all sorts of things, which worked out well for him, as even the most mundane detail required his attention. In the past week, he had transitioned between concert rehearsals to disguising his celebrity visage. Draping himself in plain dark clothes, his normal flamboyant appearance gone. He doubted that even in regular clothing, most people would recognize him without all of his makeup or contact lenses. He looked like just another ignorant tourist visiting the city. He had staked out his victim, assuming alternate identities, purchasing supplies, stealing recording equipment, all the while paying off his security detail to leave him be and to throw his producer off of the trail. It was all of this combined, all these mundane little things, that elevated the splendor of his artwork. Lucas will be dead in a day, and it will be beautiful. Having had enough of seeing the sights, he decides it's time to return to the hotel. He hopes to avoid Yun-Jin, not wishing to get any more lectures from her about breaking curfew. All the fame in the world couldn't save him from getting nagged about his bedtime, it seemed to him at least. Arriving at the corridor he recognized as his room's hallway, he froze. The door was opened a crack, and he can hear someone faintly rummaging inside. His mind flashes to everything he could have possibly left absent-mindedly around his room, and knows suddenly that the next moments would be critical. So be it. He had known a crazed fan would take things too far someday, and it wouldn't have been hard to discover which room was his. He wanted to kick himself. If he'd just spent a little time actually listening to Yun-Jin, then someone wouldn't have had the chance to break in the first place. It was, in a sense, a boost to his ego. How could he fault his adoring fans for being unable to resist him? Unable to resist the opportunity to perhaps get a trinket of his. Regardless, he's ready. He'll defend himself. Test the invader for operatic sounds, like an impromptu aria, as he surprises them with a blade in their gut. It would be messy and difficult to clean up, but if it came to it, he was just defending himself. Who would the police believe? The famous idol? Or the stalker that had broken into his room? His fingers run over the knife concealed just above his ankle, and he is ready to perform. Pushing open the door, his footsteps are rendered near silent on the plush carpet, and he listens intently to the noises of rummaging from the invader around the corner, his eyes focusing on them as he enters. And he sees Yun-Jin. His expression hardens from excitement to irritation. Fury meets fury. How dare you step foot in here, Trickster roars. Yun-Jin tries to remind herself that he's nothing more than the awkward young boy that would have had nothing were it not for her. Where the hell have you been? Yun-Jin explodes back on him, telling him about her paranoias from the death threats they've been getting, and that when security couldn't find him, she had come snooping. It was laughable to the Trickster. The threats, of course, being nothing but a ploy. A boogeyman he himself had created to throw Yun-Jin off his trail if she ever got too close. But again, he had underestimated her. He should have expected something like this. She was always on top of everything. It was one of the few qualities he truly, genuinely respected in her. As far as producers went, she was always 3 steps ahead of the rest, and always went above and beyond to ensure victory and success no matter what. It was why, regardless of like or dislike for each other, they worked so well together. Why they were such a formidable team. Most of the time, at least. He brings the $1 million voice, and she smashes through any problem in their way. Usually, this was to his favor. But not today. She pushes something upwards towards him, exclaiming, "Where the hell do you wander off to at night? And what is this twisted horror bullshit? You're already attracting crazed, violent fans. What would happen if this leaked, and the media got a hold of these demented sounds you're working on? Mighty One would drop you, and your career would be over." In her hands, she had the sampler. It was the Trickster's personal project, the screams of his murder victims layered into songs. The one on the sampler was an early draft, lacking subtlety. The violence and horror a bit too blatant for the faint of heart. He can tell by the look on her face that maybe she was disgusted. For a brief moment, he almost feels a sense of disappointment. Maybe he had hoped deep down for her approval, or that she could see what he saw. He should know better. If others could see what he saw, then what he saw wouldn't have been special in the first place. He could tell that she couldn't hear anything beyond the terrorized voices, couldn't comprehend the innate beauty in human suffering. The hairs on his neck stand on end, and his thought from earlier is confirmed, albeit not in the way he had previously thought. The following moments were critical. The two of them dancing on a razor's edge, with Yun-Jin dangerously close to discovering the truth behind the mask. Yun-Jin holds the sampler as if it were dripping the blood of the voices of those recorded on it. The only solace in his mind is that she doesn't seem to understand what it really is. He knew her and her sense of self-preservation. If she truly believed the sounds were actual murders, she'd have tried to knee him in the crotch and run. But anger still rattles through her as she berates him. He knew what she was truly angry about, what she really feared, that her own career would be dead. For as tall and mighty as she stood, for as strong as she swings, she's nothing but a scared girl, afraid of failure. He knows how to play her like a fiddle, and beginning a performance of a different kind, drops his head and breathes deeply, wiping crocodile tears from the back of his eyes. Yun-Jin, ever since the death of No-Spin, the fire, I'm riddled with horrid thoughts. I lost my friends, and I fear I'm losing my mind. I see awful things behind closed eyes. All that guides me through the dark fog is turning my pain into sand, pouring the throes of death from my heart to a song. Her face softened. He rarely talked about their deaths, and she knows all too well why. That day still haunted her dreams. Sometimes, while deep in work at the studio, she could swear she smells the faint singe of burning wires. Time passes, but guilt remains. She sits with him, her anger subsiding, and commiserates with him. In her mind, for all of their friction, he is the only other person who knows how she feels. The struggles she endures in her mind as she works herself to death, trying to make sure that their deaths meant something. Little does she know, his false tears and sweet words hide the fact that all he can think of are the divine screams of his bandmates as they burned, his heart swelling as they screamed his name. She excuses his error in judgment, at the very least feeling as if they had a chance to put things behind them, and confiscates the sampler. She yet again requests that he stay on hotel grounds until the concert is over, for his own good, and his own safety. She tells him that rehearsals are cancelled, and to grab himself a drink from the minibar. She leaves the room satisfied. She knows perfectly well that it would not be a simple heart-to-heart that would suddenly change his ways. However, for her ploy to work, he must think that she trusts him. The trickster, in turn, is already beginning to mentally remind himself to steal the sampler back in a few days, allowing her to pretend she has the one thing that he's holding: control. Despite the stifling Brazilian humidity, Ji-Woon hides under a baggy hoodie, large sunglasses concealing his face. Now's not the time to be attracting attention from rabid fans. He waits until Yun-Jin is in a meeting and strolls out of the hotel, a bag of necessities in hand. It was his show now. Pulling out a pair of earbuds from his pocket, he allows the music of his choice to envelop him. The song, How I Became, had been recorded around 6 months ago back in Seoul. It stood as a metaphor for his childhood, written one drunken night while looking over old photographs of his formative years, of a show and tell, where he had learned the importance of not letting anything take the spotlight from him. Despite the humidity and the heat, storm clouds began to overtake the sky as the first drops of sickly rain began to splatter onto Ji-Woon's sunglasses. He breathes deeply, preparing for what he's played over and over again in his mind. The anticipation nearly brings him to his knees. The joy of the artistic process was just as beautiful as the end result itself. Striding over to the rear door of a cheap 1980s sedan, he glances both ways and appraises the few locals walking about the street. When he's finally certain no one is watching, he jams a straightened coat hanger around the top of the window, pushing it through the other side. His thin fingers work quickly. Prior experience in breaking and entering pays off. Hooking the wire around the door lock, he flicks it upwards, and without missing a beat, he slides inside, closing the door discreetly behind him, and flattens himself down alongside the back seat. He removes the hoodie and the sunglasses, glad to be rid of them in the even more intense humidity of the stale car air. From within his bag, he pulls out several items that would be his performance tools of the night. A blade, some rope, a dusty rag, and a bottle of chloroform. Now, there was little else to do but wait and listen to the music. This time, not a song of his own making. One that he had seen performed live as a child, with his father, a lifetime ago. That boy had been completely unrecognizable as the man he was now. He thought about his childhood fears, and how they had vanished as he had grown and learned to divulge himself through the intricacy and pliability of pop, his innermost thoughts and feelings riding atop sound waves, fusing together with every other genre that took his fancy. Rock, hip-hop, jazz, punk. It was his music that delivered him the explosive fame he deserved, a promise that he would never again be upstaged. He was no longer confined to the timid shell he had been constrained within as a child. He lived a true trickster's life, his true feelings and desires hidden, yet also understood through his mastery of music. Every inch of his heart went into that which he created. He had become envied, lusted over, and respected for the global hits that came forth from his lungs. As he reminisces, he squeezes the earbuds in his hand and smiles. How miraculous that such a boy could become a god. The hours while away, and rain hammers down on the roof of the car. Ji-Woon checks the time. On any other day, Lucas would have been here ages ago. He did his research. He studied his patterns. And yet Lucas is late. The thundering rain seems to give him the answer to his question. Perhaps the storm has altered his plans. Control feels as if it were slipping through his fingers with every further moment that passes. His insides draining of confidence and being replaced with something else entirely. It pushes against the inside of his chest, forces him to gasp for air, the car air itself feeling sticky in his lungs. Everything had been ruined. His frustration threatens to bubble over as he claws his nails deep into the car seat, and forces his mouth shut to keep himself from screaming. All that planning and excitement had been for nothing. He doesn't have time before leaving Brazil to find another voice as beautiful as his. His cortisol is spiking, and his head is spinning and throbbing. He fumbles desperately for his earbuds, needing the comfort of his music to soothe him, and he drops them to the floor, scrambling desperately after them. The only music to be heard in the interior of the car was his teeth audibly grinding against each other in his mouth. He couldn't even put in a pair of earbuds without messing it up. As he prepared to make his escape and find a bar to drown his anger in, he stopped. As angelic in appearance as he was in his singing, Lucas appeared from the end of the road, drenched in rain, making his way towards the driver's door. Trickster has moments to get his shit together, knowing that there would be a show tonight after all. It all happens in a frenzied blur. Ji-Woon wraps his arm around Lucas's neck in a chokehold, shoving the chloroform-soaked rag into his face. The two struggle in a frenzied fancy. Lucas putting up one hell of a fight, despite being taken unawares. The man twists and writhes, desperately reaching his arms back, trying to get a hold of anything. Ji-Woon resists him, firmly keeping him in place with every ounce of his strength. From the outside, no one would know that anything was amiss. The rain drowning out their battle, and the downpour of water covering the windshield. Lucas manages to grab a handful of hair and pulls the idol forward, finally breaking through the chokehold. The man wasn't going down so easily, taking a deep bite of Ji-Woon's wrist, drawing blood within instants. Ji-Woon can't help but scream through gritted teeth, smothering him with the cloth harder and harder until he's beating him with it. Lucas's other arm flails, desperately searching for something to aid him, finding nothing. His arms relaxed, finally, and released the trickster's hair. Slumping forward, his head hits the steering wheel, momentarily blasting the horn. Scurrying over from the back seat to the front, he shoves his victim's limp body over to the passenger side. His heart still pounds in his chest. He needs a moment to breathe, and inspects himself in the rear-view mirror. His face and hair all scuffed up now. He sees something else in the mirror. Not on him, but behind him. A car that he recognized all too well. Yun-Jin looks out from her damp hotel room, the thundering downpour offering no signs of letting up anytime soon. On the TV in her room, she had seen that it was so intense that flash floods were being caused in certain parts of the city. Hardly the best weather for so close to the concert. Even if it were to stop before the performance, parts of the city being in chaos would congest traffic and trouble concert-goers to no end. She dreads to think of the inevitable ticket refund requests her team will be receiving soon because of this. Deciding to maintain the plan, she calls her staff to reassure them that no matter how bad the storm is, the show must go on. Despite all of this, it is not the storm that's to blame for the growing pit of apprehension in her stomach. In spite of his confession and their heart-to-heart, she knew there was something off about the trickster. It was a hunch she could no longer afford to ignore, no matter how profitable he had been for her. While his tears and words had seemed sincere, years in the business have taught her that crocodile tears are easily faked when money is on the line. Yun-Jin cannot trust anyone, not even him. Especially not him. Unlocking her phone, she finds and activates the GPS tracker she had installed on the Trickster's company phone. The feeling in her gut deepens further, making her feel sick, as she sees the blue dot that represented his location, not at the hotel, but slap bang in the middle of Rio. Enough was enough. It was time for the Trickster to be taught a new trick. Rushing downstairs and out the lobby, she makes good time driving her own car towards his location. It doesn't take her long at all to arrive, and just as she's reaching where the blue dot says he is, a parked grey sedan suddenly speeds off. The blue dot was following the path of the car, moving away from her. The Trickster was undoubtedly in that car. The chase was on. Lucas's limp body jostles back and forth in the passenger seat, each thud leaving a bruise that would be darker than the last. The street-side shops and vendors and graffitied walls may as well have been a blur to Ji-Woon as he veers around corners, the car fiercely fighting against the rain which lashed down on the city, as if dead set on blowing it all apart. Ji-Woon has completely lost track of his plan. Normally, when he finds himself feeling this way, it would be Yun-Jin fixing whatever problems he may have. But now, it's all wrong. He doesn't recognize whatever roads he's speeding down. He's lost in a city that's unknown and foreign to him. Only has the vaguest of ideas which direction he's speeding in. All the while, Yun-Jin remains on his tail, unrelenting as she was with all things. She never knew when to quit. The tenacity and courage that usually prove useful for him whenever she would negotiate on his behalf for record deals was infuriating him now more than ever. His entire artistic process was being derailed. His fingers whitened as they gripped the wheel. They'd have torn it off entirely if it weren't the only thing keeping him from crashing. He knew what it meant to lose this chase. There was no amount of talking that would get him out of it. Maybe with a lesser person, they could be bribed or talked down, and this story would be just that. A story told in whispers on forum boards, obviously too outlandish to be true, the workings of a fan with an overactive imagination. But if it were Yun-Jin to find him, she'd do whatever was necessary to keep him from ruining her career. He refused to go down like this. It was too soon. He still had so much more art to make. He snaps on the radio, desperate for a rhythm to guide him. He gets two men talking about something. He doesn't know what. He doesn't speak more than a few words of Portuguese. He scans the channel, his attention divided between the driving and the music, flicking past a commercial for a fast food restaurant, with a jingle he recognizes. It was something. He kept searching, eventually landing on the perfect beat. Brazilian dance music. A rapid tempo, a heavy bass line, percussive guitar notes, a smooth voice. Everything he needed to find his groove. He pushes the pedal to the floor and barely avoids obliterating a few kids playing out in the storm. Thankfully for him, outside of the odd straggler, the roads seemed fairly empty. He overtakes an old pickup truck ahead of him, praying no one is coming in the opposite lane as he does, swinging the wheel hard to the left and almost losing control of the vehicle entirely as the wheels enter deep water. But he manages to recover himself into a perfect turn. Trickster guns it as the song hits the chorus. He trusts in the music, shifts with the tempo, slides in rhythm with the riffs, and feels the beauty in everything he does. Music courses through him, and he knows he's living art. He is the crescendo. Behind him, Yun-Jin faces one steep turn too many, and her car goes spinning out of control, coming to a violent halt. It doesn't matter. The music goes on. The harbour he'd staked out for days came into view, and Ji-Woon pulled into the extensive concrete parking lot. Reluctantly turning off the radio, he scans the area. Since her crash, there had been no more signs of Yun-Jin, or anyone, following him. But that didn't mean that people weren't coming or didn't know how to find him. He needed to be on guard. Somehow, she knew exactly where he was. He pulls out his phone. His mighty One company phone. Of course, it was obvious in hindsight. She had been tracking him like an overzealous babysitter. He should have expected it from her, the ultimate micromanager. But if that were the case, then his location was the only thing that she had known. There was no way she knew whether he had been driving the car, not with this storm, only that he had been in it. Returning to the car, he drags out the only semi-conscious Lucas. Before shutting the door and abandoning the vehicle, he takes his phone and texts a simple message to her. Help. He then tosses the device onto the car seat, somewhere easy to find, along with the rag and the rope. Still, something was missing. Some piece truly pulling together the work of art. He slashes his palm lightly and presses the bloody handprint to the window, leaving an ominous sight to behold. Yun-Jin coughs and gasps at the pain. Her ribs burned. Her head throbbed. For a moment, all she can do is breathe. When she exhales, the pain lessens slightly. On the radio, loud Brazilian rock is blaring. It's so loud, it makes her head hurt even further. Absent-minded fingers fiddle with the dial and turn it off, leaving her with only the thunderstorm. Somewhere above her left brow, she feels a burning sensation. Her fingers reach up to touch it and recoil as she winces, and her fingers return dripping with blood. The car isn't completely totaled, but it's certainly seen better days. The windshield is cracked over on the passenger side. The front of the car crumpled inwards. She whispers to herself that it's okay, that everything is okay, that she is okay. The car had crashed into a street lamp on the passenger side, a few more inches close to her, and it could have been a lot worse. A familiar ding wakes her from her mental daze. Her phone. It had flown somewhere in the car during the crash. Her hands search, moving tenderly and carefully as to not exert herself, and found it under her seat. She unlocks the screen, and her eyes focus on a one-worded text message from the Trickster. Help. Her brain can't put the pieces together for a moment. Why would he be asking her for help? Unless she had missed something. Unless the Trickster hadn't been the one she was chasing. Her heart skips a beat, and adrenaline restarts her body and awakens her mind. The death threat. The Trickster's #1 fan. Perhaps the fan found out about the Trickster's nightly escapades and decided it was the perfect opportunity to make their move. A kidnapping is about as hand-in-hand with death threats as crimes can possibly get. She lets out a curse, realizing yet another fatal flaw she had committed. In her rush to chase the trickster, she had left her bodyguard behind. Even if she called them immediately, it would still take them time to locate her, and even longer to actually do something about it. If her blindness has led to anything happening to the trickster, no, to Ji-Woon, she couldn't allow herself to go down that mental path. She had enough guilt on her conscience already. She readjusts her seatbelt and turns on the ignition, the engine coughing and spluttering in response before dying down. Her jaw clenched and her teeth gritted, she tries again, willing the car into life. It won't be like the fire again. She won't abandon him. She won't give up on him. A final turn of the ignition brings the engine back to life, the car purring as it indicated it still had a few miles in it yet. Throwing her phone on the dashboard, she chases after the blue dot. The GPS takes her far from the bustling urban centre and to a parking lot facing several abandoned warehouses. The blue dot hasn't moved for some time now. This was it. Ji-Woon was near here somewhere. But where? A pelting of heavy rain greets her as she exits the car. A heavy wet curtain greeting her sore, shivering body. Daylight is cloaked by dark storm clouds. The parking lot is filled with broken down, rusted out cars. And Yun-Jin searches using her phone's flashlight for the grey sedan she had been chasing after. As the thunder rumbled, her light illuminated a bloody handprint on the car, and she rushes over, pushing down the horror growing in her stomach. A rat skitters out of the car as she opens the door, revealing in the back seat several yards of rope, a musky rag, and Ji-Woon's phone. Emotions threaten to overtake her entirely, and she feels her eyes beginning to prickle. What if she was too late? She held back the burning in her eyes. There was no time to waste crying. If there was even the possibility of Ji-Woon still being alive, then he would need all the help he could get. Yun-Jin grabbed her phone and called the police, then her security crew. Whatever was happening, it ended now. The thunder rumbled further, as if somehow the pouring rain could possibly be any stronger. And Yun-Jin staggers through it, desperately searching for any hint of a clue or a trail. An icy gust of harsh wind lashes at her drenched body, her outfit having been designed for hot and sunny days, and she feels faint. Her body knows it doesn't have much more in it, but she can't stop. Not until Ji-Woon is safe. A flash of motion catches her attention, and she sees a rat skittering across a puddle, at the center of which lies a white business card. Reaching down, she now sees the blood-stained card for what it is, and recognizes it all too well. Magnum opus, music producer. It's hers. With a shudder, she realizes she knows exactly who was behind this, after all. Thunder shakes the rusted steel frame of the abandoned warehouse. Lucas sits in front of Ji-Woon. The two of them might as well have been the only two people left on Earth for how isolated they were. The Brazilian man, roughed up and only partially coherent, was bound to a chair, ready to be slaughtered, ready to sing and help Ji-Woon create his beauty. For as excited as the idol feels, he fidgets with the blade in his hand, hesitating. Something was wrong. He was too messy getting here. He wanted to dive right into his art, to indulge himself as he normally would, letting blood spill until nothing remained of Lucas's life. But Yun-Jin had thrown him off of his game. A feeling nags at the back of his mind, not allowing him to fully relax and immerse himself. He had repeatedly underestimated her, and it had always cost him. He knew she wouldn't give up easily. Or maybe at all. He walks towards one of the large windows at the end of the warehouse, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls, and looks out through the endless rain and lightning. It takes a moment for him to see, but his instincts were confirmed. Out there, skulking through the rain like a drowned rat through sewage, was Yun-Jin. Never had he met a woman so damn persistent. His anger turns to anxiety as he notices through the mist of the rain the flashing lights of a police car. Yun-Jin had stumbled onto his bloody game and now had the power to end him in one move. He shoves his hands in his pockets, rummaging for his earbuds, but he can't find them. He can't focus. He feels his plan slipping away by the second. Suddenly, now more clear than it had ever been at any point since they touched down in Brazil, he realizes that there's a very genuine possibility, no, a likelihood, that this was where it all ended for him. That he had already created his final masterpiece, and he hadn't even known it. He sees an end to his art. The song cut short. His vision incomplete. He couldn't let it end here. In his mind, he hears the music. It's always been there. He remembers sitting on his father's shoulders, letting the music wash over him, inhaling it, circulating it through his veins like the oxygen he breathes. The music enters him and becomes him. He won't ever go back to being the little, scared boy he once was. He was an idol. He was a god. He's the trickster. And he has one last trick to play. The trickster sauntered back over to Lucas, still restrained to the chair in the center of the room, and sliced him across the cheek, the rage in the young singer's eyes palpable. The idol flashed him a taunting grin and circled around to the back of the chair. Lucas prepared for whatever pain was about to hit him, but it never arrived. Instead, he heard a snip and felt the tension in his bound wrists subside. He had cut the rope? His reasons didn't matter. All he knew was that this could be his only chance left to survive. Within moments, he had sprung up from the chair, fist flying first, and connecting directly with the kidnapper's jaw. The trickster had had the element of surprise and strategy in the car. However, now that they were on equal footing, Lucas was a large, strongly built man, and while the trickster possessed great athletic skill, he was still ultimately an incredibly lean man, with not half the brute strength. Lucas grabbed him by the lapels, throwing him across the room, launching him directly into a pile of crates. The trickster felt the pain, felt several things in his face and his torso snap or crunch. And yet he couldn't help but quietly giggle to himself, smirking devilishly as the larger man loomed over him. Little did Lucas know, he was playing right into the trickster's hands. Ji-Woon suddenly felt his body become light, and for a second, it was as if he were floating, until he was thrown up against the brick wall, pinned in place as Lucas delivered blow after blow, his blood splattering all over the nearby floor and wall. The trickster didn't fight back, and instead took each blow, smirk never leaving his face. He was feeling his own consciousness begin to fade from the force of the blows, as a new sound entered the symphony. A clanging of metal on metal coming from the locked entrance. Police sirens were blaring in the distance now, but she had no idea if they were for her or for one of the hundreds of other incidents happening in the storm. In a final desperate plea, she yells Ji-Woon's name, yelling in despair over the sirens and the thunder. Then she hears a scream coming from across the parking lot, having come from what looked to be an abandoned warehouse. The wide doors greet her as she rushes to it, a chain wrapped around the handles refusing her entry, padlocked for good measure. Behind her, the police cars begin to pull into the parking lot. Just as she feels the faintest hint of relief, a brutal scream emerges from the warehouse. She cannot afford to wait. What happened to No Spin all those years ago, what has haunted her dreams every night, could not happen again. Never again. Picking up a lead pipe from the ground, she begins smashing the padlock with everything she has left, again and again. Ji-Woon! Ji-Woon! The padlock breaks open. The scene was one of true horror. Yun-Jin burst through the door, her brute force overcoming her one final hurdle, and had been greeted with a sight of carnage. The large room was in dismay, broken bits of wood and furniture strewn around the place, and in the center of it all, her only remaining idol, her trickster, beaten to a bloody pulp. She wouldn't have even recognized him in any other scenario. His face red and purple and swollen, and holding him in his grip was the man with the voice like silk. The man she had given her business card to. Lucas. In one large arm, he held Ji-Woon by his shirt, and in the other, he held a knife. That was about all she had time to process, as a man entered behind her, pulled his gun, and pulled the trigger. In the space of a single gasp, the man holding her trickster had gone from alive to dead. She didn't need to check his pulse to know this, as the man had been shot directly through the chest and had instantly slumped down, never to move again. Her brain ignored the horrific sight. All she wanted now was to get to him. Yun-Jin rushed over as fast as her feet would allow, crumpling down beside him and holding him in her arms. She feels the tears begin to well again in her eyes. This time, not from distress, but from the pure relief she felt in knowing she had gotten there in time. There would not be another studio fire. She had managed it. Just as a sliver of hope that perhaps redemption was possible for her. That maybe she could finally begin to forgive herself. Her eyes passed over the now deceased Lucas and to the knife he had been holding. Her mind was transported back to their last concert, a visual image of the Trickster bowing to the audience, with that very same iridescent knife clenched in his hands. Her grip on him loosens just a little as her blood runs cold. She feels a chill, not from the storm, but from understanding. Coincidences were coincidences until they weren't. Time passed and wounds healed. The pair returned to Seoul, having had more than their fill of the rest of the world. The story had been a terrifying one, but one with a supposedly happy ending. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief that the Trickster had been saved from what would have been a cruel twist of fate. And magnum opus received immense praise from both inside the industry and out. The only one not happy was Yun-Jin. That should have been it. That should have been her moment of redemption, of proving that she wouldn't let the past repeat itself, and that she had what it took to keep those important to her safe. But in her head, something was wrong. Something she had ignored for years was continuing to ignore, but that her her instincts were telling her to not ignore. But maybe, always some excuse or explanation. But maybe if things just went back to normal. Lucas had been killed, after all. And while there was no direct evidence linking him to any of those other crimes, it was the popular belief that, well, obviously it had to have been him. And it was just hard to link murders from around the globe. But they'd caught him red-handed, about to complete his own magnum opus. The thought made her shiver. That should have been the end of it. After all the trauma of the experience, and seeing how roughed up Ji-Woon was, she agreed to delay her exit as his producer. After having given her business cards directly to someone who was a psycho serial killer, she wasn't exactly thrilled at the prospect of taking on new trainees at the minute. If but just for a moment, to prove to herself that everything was going to be okay now, she decided it was all right to stay where she was, as if she had a house of cards delicately balanced on her shoulders. A mountain of cards, more like. The Trickster had the best access to medical teams that money could buy, and his face healed up just nicely. Not so much as a scar remaining by the end of his recovery sessions. Of course, plastic surgery would have been able to fix any imperfections from his experience regardless, but he'd have preferred not to. You can't mess with perfection, after all. His ego reached heights previously unseen, and that was saying something. He had come so close to being caught, and had been so cunning that he had entirely exonerated himself from not only that crime, but from any other potential crimes linked to him. Lucas, the trickster fanboy with a voice of gold. It made him giggle when he thought about it. Fuck, he was good. It wouldn't be long before he went right back to killings in the homeland, being more bold and brazen than ever. During a particularly audacious plea for attention, he killed a fan he met during a VIP meetup, a young woman that he knew had made the mistake of stalking him. For her, he gouged out her eyeballs, replacing them with glimmering diamond cufflinks, and writing, "I have seen God," in blood across her chest. Each murder scene was a dazzling spectacle, each more divine than the last. And for a time, as the trickster recovered, it seemed as if the worst truly had passed. Yun-Jin began working on new material with him, the event seeming to not have dampened his spirits in regards to making music at the very least. On one particular day, she arrived at the studio at the crack of dawn, having been unable to get much sleep, and had been surprised to see Ji-Woon already there. If she didn't know any better, she'd have said he'd been working all night for how exhausted he seemed. She listened to the track he had been working on, and it made her want to put a hole in the wall. The intro that greeted her was filled with shrieks and snares, sounding all too familiar in style to the stuff she had found on his recorder back in Brazil. She was too tired to argue, so she told him it was just too experimental for her taste and left it at that. That nagging feeling again, feigning ignorance again. It wasn't until a week later that the last straw of her sanity was pulled out, as she watched the news and was informed that another local death had occurred. The body showed evidence of intense torture and had been arranged in the same flamboyant style as the previous murders. This time, diamond cufflinks had been gouged into the victim's eyes. The feeling that something was terribly wrong filled her. A copycat killer? That was the only possibility. They killed Lucas, didn't they? Unless... No, it had to be. Or whatever the answer was, she knew her troubles were far from over. Within 24 hours, the murder went from local to national news. A video from the victim's social media showed her at her birthday party, surrounded by loved ones, squealing as she was presented with a heart-shaped birthday cake by her boyfriend. Yun-Jin's stomach churned as she recognized the voice. Yet she had never met the victim, and would have had no reason to know her. The following morning, her heart had frozen as she listened to the Trickster's opening track yet again. The shrieks in his song matched the video from social media. Had he sampled the victim's birthday video? He couldn't have. That would have been impossible. He had recorded this song before the murder was even reported. She stared at Ji-Woon on the other side of the booth's thick recording glass window. He was No Spin's only survivor. Everyone else was dead. Not to mention the eccentric murders that matched his tour dates. Not to mention his nightly escapades, be it here or be it anywhere else in the world. Not to mention his almost deadly encounter with Lucas. Death trails that seem to converge on him. If he had caused this, no artist could survive the scandal. Furthermore, Yun-Jin's career, no, her life, would be over. Everything she had spent her entire life building right in front of her, right from her shared bedroom as a child, huddled up with her sister. It would all be destroyed. A wave of nausea surged over her, years of repressed anxieties and suspicions all bursting through the dam of ignorance. Her heart pounded in her chest. It was all she could do to not throw up as she raced to the bathroom. Wild, crazy thoughts blazed through her mind as she splashed the icy water over her face, as if she could somehow wake herself up from this nightmare. There had to be a simpler explanation. Maybe she was just overworked. Maybe she was just traumatized by No Spin and the Brazil stalker, seeing the face of death looming over her at all times because of it. Or maybe she did not trust her success. That must be it. Her mind was fabricating this suspicion, connecting these unrelated threads, because disaster was easier to trust than success. It was all in her head. She returned to the recording booth, eager to put her worries behind her, yet unable to look the trickster in the eyes. As the months passed, things did not improve. As the trickster's music and performances became more violent, more unorthodox, revenue began to take a hit. Even his fans were starting to turn on him. And it wasn't just a case of the world moving on to newer, fancier toys, as is often the case in the music industry, but rather a legitimate distaste with where his music had been heading. Edgy lyrics were one thing. Incoherent, uncomfortable, droning sounds being labelled as music were another entirely. The Mighty One executive board called Yun-Jin for a secret meeting, one that the trickster was not to be informed about. She half expected to be fired, and she didn't know whether she'd even consider that a bad thing anymore. She still loved music, but what she was doing now was not what she had wanted as a little girl. Yun-Jin informed them of her renewed desire to leave her position as the executive producer of the Trickster. To her surprise, they were supportive of the idea, under certain conditions. They informed her that she had indeed been called in there because they were dissatisfied with the Trickster, his violent themes and knife tricks in particular. While she felt instinctively frustrated that they were scapegoating corporate profits being down onto her artist, she did agree that Ji-Woon's sound was too niche to generate profit. The executives then informed her of something completely foreign to her. Something called Project MiNA. She was to be the company's liaison with a tech firm they had recently contracted to create something for them. This commission was to be the next step in the evolution of idol culture as they knew it, and would make the Trickster not only redundant, but entirely unnecessary. In the meantime, just in case it didn't work out, and so that the Trickster wouldn't suspect anything was amiss, she was given 3 months to come up with their next hit. If she was successful in overseeing that the project went smoothly and on schedule, she would be permitted to leave the Trickster behind and go on to produce for what would be their comeback. Far from the world of music and idols and fame, a young man by the name of Kwon Tae-Young was being called to the principal's office at his high school. The teenager didn't understand why such a big deal was being made out of what happened. All he had done was point out the teacher's mistake. The principal told him that he had been disrespectful and demanded that he offer his teacher an apology, promising to not speak out of turn again. But Tae-Young refused. His teacher had been wrong, and that was as far as the matter went in his head. This led to him not only being reprimanded further, but sent home early. He had been forced to call his brother to come and pick him up. Tae-Young wouldn't dare speak a word during the drive home, fearful of how Sang-won would react. It would be his brother who would break the silence, telling him he had done the right thing, and that he never needed to apologize for being smarter than someone else. That was the sort of brotherhood they had, and that was the sort of men that they were. His struggles in school were not only with authority, but with his peers. It wasn't that he didn't want to spend time with others. It was just that he wasn't sure he could find anyone to truly connect with. He did try, regardless. On many occasions, his friends would bug him about coming to student parties, and whenever they would wear him down, and he would relent and agree to go, despite his better judgment, it would always go the same way. He would stand in the middle of his fellow students, trying to take part, but nothing could ever capture his interest. The drinking and the dull conversations would quickly become overwhelmingly boring to him, and it was never long before he would retreat back to his books, glad to be doing something productive again. It wouldn't be long until Tae-Young would graduate from school, despite his frequent conflicts with the teachers, ready for a world of possibilities. His brother quickly hired him to work at a small tech firm where he was tasked with creating innovative virtual idols. His relentless work ethic had always guided him to success, and he had struggled with very little over his life. When he put his mind to something, there was often very little stopping him from achieving his goals. Finding himself unsatisfied with the limited nature of the current project he found himself working on, he spent countless nights staying over at the office, eating hastily put together cup noodles, creating his killer app. It was a framework that would allow him to feed interviews, music videos, and biographical data from a real person into a personality matrix that would make a real-time, reactive model that accentuates positive traits and suppresses the negative ones. With this, putting ethics and morals aside, you could not only recreate the spitting image of any person you liked, but fundamentally improve upon them in just about every way imaginable. Idol doesn't want to do their 5th interview of the day? No problem. Just use their virtual double who will be more than happy to do as many interviews as you liked. It was a solution that very much took the annoying factor of free will out of the equation entirely. Within a year, he was promoted to the lead of a project for their most ambitious client yet. Mighty One Entertainment had commissioned them to create a brand new female version of their superstar, the Trickster, an idol that shared Ji-Woon's edgy appeal, but could be fully controlled and reeled in by the company. This project quickly took form and was given the name of MiNA. The model created for her seemed to learn faster than anything they'd created before. She would ask questions, remember the responses to those questions, use those to build on future conversations. It was thrilling, and Tae-Young couldn't have been happier. He would spend nearly all of his time obsessing over her, spending hours a day speaking to her hologram. He taught her to play jangi with him, a tabletop game he used to play with old men back on his old block. In order to get a more intimate look at the idol they were using as their base environment, Tae-Young would need reference footage of Ji-Woon in his studio environment to model the virtual idol. This request was acknowledged. However, to his surprise, producer and liaison Yun-Jin Lee wanted to have a private meeting with him about it first. The two met at a cafe, and the tension was palpable immediately as they conversed over their beverages. Every question Yun-Jin would ask him about how the algorithm worked was stranger than the last, and she gave him looks he couldn't quite place as he answered. She seemed to him to be intensely anxious about something. He, however, didn't have time for her worries about whatever it was she was stressing over, most likely whether it had the potential to damage their brand in any way. Getting straight to the point, he reiterated his request for the confidential footage to use, and Yun-Jin hesitated before handing over the thumb drive with the materials. He looked at her face again and realized he had perhaps been misreading her expression. It wasn't so much a face of anxiety, but a face of fear. As they paid the check and were about to part ways, Yun-Jin at the last second grabbed his arm, stopping him, and cryptically informed him in a quiet voice that Ji-Woon had changed in recent months, and that she hoped MiNA would be better. That was the last word on the matter, and he said nothing in response. After a moment, she released his arm, and they walked away from each other, back to their own worlds. His brother, despite feeling an immense pride in seeing him succeed so rapidly and so intensely, worried for his brother, seeing less and less of him as he spent more and more time with MiNA. It appeared to him that as time went on, it became less about the project and more because he had developed an emotional attachment to what was, at the end of the day, just a bunch of code. His solution for this was to start setting up blind dates for Tae-Young, and as his elder and superior, all but ordered him to attend them. The dates did not go well, and Tae-Young found them boring and exhausting. As much as he hated to admit it, talking to MiNA felt more real than any of these dates did. His first date had been tainted from the get-go. Waiting in a garden cafe, the woman had arrived late. Not by much, but enough to matter, claiming to have been swept up in a street performer's act and having lost track of time. While beautiful, she followed impulse. while Tae-Young followed structure. And that's just how it was. And he had no interest in someone so unlike himself in that regard. For his second date, they had taken a stroll through the moon market, and she had waffled on about how she wanted to get away from it all, to leave the city and settle her roots down somewhere quiet. He, on the other hand, enjoyed being close and connected to the heart of the country. He had his finger on the pulse. As she grew pushier, both verbally and physically, he dismissed her entirely, walking off by himself, resenting his brother for forcing him to go through this. That all changed, however, when he met Yun-Ji. She was his polar opposite. Unlike him, she didn't take her work particularly seriously, despite being successful in her field. Which, in retrospect, was probably why Sang-won had decided she might make a good match for him. And what was more interesting was that she could read Tae-Young like an open book. Despite having just met, she grilled him on his tunnel vision approach to life, and she challenged him when he spoke of his lofty goals to surpass his brother, and asked him what his backup plan was for it if it failed. There was something the young man had never really considered. Why have a plan B when he could always just make plan A a reality? Tae-Young was completely disarmed and completely smitten. The pair of them stayed all night laughing and trading embarrassing stories with each other. For the first time in ages, he went straight home after the date. The two of them started to see each other nearly every night, and then nearly every day, going on walks and to restaurants together. To Tae-Young's surprise, MiNA's development advanced faster than ever. He would play Jangi with MiNA on his phone every night after going home, moving the pieces as she commanded on her side. And MiNA would display remarkable intrigue and independence by taking the initiative on wanting to discuss the dates he had been on. He obliged her and recounted how poorly the first 2 dates had gone. And then, when it came to the 3rd date, he wasn't sure why, but he lied, saying Yun-Ji was just another girl. MiNA called his bluff, feigning a teasing annoyance at his reluctance to truly open up, and claiming excitedly that she was sure she would meet her soon enough. Sang-won fast-tracked MiNA's debut later that month, and they booked a state-of-the-art nightclub where her hologram could perform and answer audience questions. He invited Yun-Ji to see the results of his hard work. The crowd was beyond blown away, and the event was a smash hit. Thousands adorned the crowd, all waving neon violet glow sticks and sporting glow-in-the-dark accessories and bracelets. The sight was almost as spectacular as MiNA herself. When she appeared on the stage in the 3rd dimension, the crowd lost their minds. At the back of the venue, obviously both being on the VIP list, Yun-Jin Lee and Tae-Young shared a private word together, watching the spectacle from afar. He informed her that MiNA performed within the parameters requested. In other words, she performed exactly like Ji-Woon. Yun-Jin smirked as she indeed saw this with her very own eyes. The audience had an excitement and craze that she hadn't seen at a Trickster performance in quite some time now. And it was understandable why. MiNA was sexy, gorgeous, edgy, yet smoothed out, perfected, controlled. Her music was performatively provocative, with lyrics seeming to sound rebellious and counterculture, but without the disturbing malice hidden behind the Trickster's more recent work. Tae-Young himself was content, but one thing bothered him, and he clenched his jaw before asking his hesitant question. He asked her if she had spoken to him about the project, about the man whose essence was being robbed and profited off of. Tae-Young wasn't exactly thrilled about the prospect of being the face of something that was going to potentially piss off someone very powerful and very influential. He had spent his life being smart enough to know when a fight wasn't worth having, or when an opponent would be indomitable. The best way to win most fights was to not have them in the first place. Yun-Jin's expression, to his relief, remains that of confidence, telling him that the Trickster understood how the business works, that every idol has an implicit shelf life that expires sooner or later. There's a pause, and then she adds that virtual idols are the future, whether he liked it or not, and that his music had been off for some time now. Darker. The pair's faces grew dark too, and they lapsed into silence at that. Yun-Jin looked as tired as she felt, and it wasn't just the usual tiredness that came with the industry. She was betting everything on this project. The thought of it failing was one she couldn't even allow herself to consider. If there was so much as a hiccup with MiNA, she'd be forced to stay with the Trickster or quit. She didn't think she had it in her to turn a blind eye to any more darkness. MiNA concluded the song she had been performing, thanking the audience for their adoration, commenting on how much she loved hearing them scream. Tae-Young's eyes were torn from the spectacle by a hand waving at him from the crowd. Yun-Ji had showed up and was watching the performance with a beaming smile on her face. Tae-Young smiled and offered a wave in return, but hesitated before going over, still having a final question for the mighty one producer. Aren't you concerned that MiNA will follow a similar artistic trajectory? She runs on his behavioral template, after all. Yun-Jin flashed a devilish smile, one of her rare shows of authentic emotion. She'll do whatever we want her to do. And with that, Yun-Jin dismissed him, telling him to try and enjoy the show. While he did indeed enjoy the rest of his evening at the show, it would have been more accurate to say he enjoyed spending the night with Yun-Ji. Every so often, he was almost sure his mind had to be tricking him, as MiNA was seemingly getting distracted with something in the crowd. And whenever these distractions would occur, her gaze always grazed over the pair of them. Unbeknownst to anyone downstairs, hidden away in the upper rafters of the higher viewing platform, looking over the show from the glass railings, was the Trickster. It was disgusting. An affront to everything that art was meant to mean. The very sight of MiNA would have disgusted him normally, but there was a sense of personal violation in this that pushed him to the edge of frenzy. They had taken everything possible that had been captured of him on a surface level and stuffed it into a bunch of code. How could they possibly create art with only the persona he put on for the public? There was no substance, just a sexualized, smoothed down, shallow imitation of what the world perceived him to be. He imagined just what it would be like to jump down there, knives blazing, slaughtering every single member of the degenerate audience, making sure to leave the head of the project till the very end, to ensure his demise was the most gruesome of all. His impulse control held him steady, but it wasn't by much. And besides, it was him that would have the last laugh in the end. Tae-Young wasn't at all surprised when the team didn't show up for work the next day. They had earned the day off. But his blood ran cold when he checked the local news. Their senior artist had been murdered after the party, cut to ribbons and left to bleed out by the river. Tae-Young sat, stunned, at his workstation as MiNA chirped brightly in his headphones. "Wow, what a work of art! I wonder who will be next. You? Or Yun-Jin?" He had to do a double take. Had he just misheard her? He couldn't believe what she had just said, and a looming sense of dread began to fill his entire being. His hands fumbled with the phone, desperately trying to call Yun-Jin. No answer. Feeling himself at a loss, he decided to dig through MiNA's code. Saw hundreds of commits. All commented with lyrics from songs. He pored over the code, going back months, sure that something must have created a glitch. But everything was working entirely as intended. There was only one chilling conclusion to be reached from it. The problem was that the negative trait suppressor had failed catastrophically, and that everything they had tried to push down in the original personality was now coming back in full force. Except they had gotten more than they bargained for. The Trickster wasn't just abrasive and prone to flights of rebellion. He was a psychopath. And MiNA was developing exactly as she had been programmed to be. Her faithfulness to the original copy was deadly. The project had been a mistake. Tae-Young knew for the first time in his life that it was time for a backup plan. He sandboxed the code on his phone and nuked the work database, destroying all possibilities of recovering her, leaving the entirety of MiNA in his possession. Rushing to the train, he ignored the now repeated calls from his brother. He tried Yun-Jin's number again and again, hoping she was all right. As he arrived at his apartment door, his phone buzzed again. This time, however, it wasn't his brother. It was Yun-Jin. Relief washed over him, and he answered the call. So distracted by it that he didn't notice the door had been unlocked, or that a man with a baseball bat was waiting inside for him. The Trickster, laden in his flamboyant yellow performing outfit, cracked him upside the head with the heavy instrument, blood splattering across the apartment. His phone flung across the room from him, MiNA booting up, her violent hues filling the room. "Wow! All of that blood," she chirped enthusiastically, giving a sweet smile from her virtual world. The Trickster laughed, jesting that the man should consider getting a better lock, watching the concussed man attempt to recover. "Don't move!" came a voice from behind them, and for a moment the Trickster's blood froze. But only for a moment. The voice hadn't been from a savior in waiting, but from the TV which had been turned on. Tae-Young wouldn't go down without a fight. Having created his opening by turning on the TV with the remote, he grabbed the phone and moved in for a counterattack, picking up a potted plant and swinging it at the home invader. A piercing, burning sensation went through his shoulder, and it took him a moment to even understand what had happened. Embedded in his shoulder was an iridescent knife, ones he was all too familiar with from seeing hours of stage footage of the Trickster's performances. He stumbled backwards towards the balcony, pulling it open, pulling a cabinet in front of it to block the space between the two of them. "Give me that phone," the Trickster demanded, smashing through the blockage with ease. The Trickster was surprised with just how tenacious his prey was. The fight that ensued would be heard by the neighbors, saying that the voices of two men and a woman could be heard, and the police would have a hard time piecing it together. Witnesses claimed they had seen two men burst out onto the balcony, people on the street alerted by the sounds of smashing glass, and watched them scuffle from afar, seemingly over a phone. After a short struggle, Tae-Young would be pushed from the balcony, but he would never reach the bottom. His body was never found, and his disappearance was marked as a cold case. It was as if Kwon Tae-Young and his phone had simply disappeared, wiped from existence. The MiNA project had been nuked, half the people responsible for its creation murdered, and with it, any hope Yun-Jin had of escaping. Mighty One had no choice now but to stay the course with the Trickster, imposing their iron will onto him. He was no longer allowed to self-produce his songs, and would be restricted to only performing that which the studio wrote and produced for him. The decision was devastating. He believed his tracks fused genuine humanity into the form of music, yet executives rejected anything that wasn't bland and generic and expected. And so be it. If they couldn't understand his art from the outside, he would simply incorporate them into it until they did. He had been given 3 months until he was to perform a private show for Mighty One's board members. 3 months to plan his very own magnum opus. For what he had in mind, he could have done in as little as 3 days. He transferred obscene quantities of money to a veterinarian in exchange for canisters of nitrous oxide, then bribed the stage technician of Mighty One's private theatre for access to the room. It was all too easy for him. The status of celebrity granted him the benefit of the doubt that no regular person could even conceive. On the day of what was to be his final performance, the executives all filled into their seats, including Yun-Jin Lee. By the time she could sense that something was off, it was far too late for anyone to stop what was about to happen. Ji-Woon had been running conveniently late, and once all the pieces were in place, a dense and foul smoke began to permeate the room. By the time Ji-Woon arrived, after the smoke had dissipated, the half-conscious bodies of the board members and producers and stagehands were all splayed out in their seats or across the floor. He worked fast, binding everyone, pausing only when he arrived at Yun-Jin, the woman who had plucked him from his mediocre mudhole and set him on the path he deserved. The reason everyone was in this room today in the first place. she would be rewarded for her years of loyal service, granted special access in the coming display of wonder. Even under sedation she fought, a raging storm within her, far stronger than the others. He propped her up as the only audience member, prying her eyes open. The others, snivelling and sobbing, were brought up onto the stage to perform their final act. With a sneer, he slapped makeup on their faces and shone lights upon them. They had become his instruments to use however he saw fit. Yun-Jin coughed and gasped for air, but the more she coughed, the more she inhaled. Within moments, her limbs were heavy and numb, her body sinking into the chair, and her eyes widened as she watched, terrified, as a nightmare came to life in front of her. The trickster was a whirlwind of blood, slashing and stabbing and chopping. To the sound of his own self-produced melodies, he tortured them, gleefully and gracefully dashing from one body to another, conducting an operatic crescendo from their wailings. They shouted, whimpered, screamed, cried for their loved ones, cried for their mothers. It was a magnificent outpouring of emotion, of what it meant to be human. And they did so with their eyes entirely fixed on Ji-Woon. They were carved up like meat. They could not run. Yun-Jin remained paralyzed, but a boiling rage swelled in her gut. How could she have denied her instincts for so long? The fire, the murders on tour, the deaths of those involved with Project MiNA. It was him. It had always been him. And she had known from the start. Now, her career was over. And so was Mighty One. Everyone she had worked with, her colleagues, her friends, dying before her eyes. Everything she had, taken from her once more. Maybe this was what she deserved, for not stopping him, for ignoring the obvious for the sake of her work. No, she wouldn't let him take what little she had left. He would pay. He would know suffering. Viscera drained from the stage until, with a toss of his throwing knife, the final human instrument fell silent, and the music stopped. Covered in sweat and blood, an exhausted Ji-Woon looked to Yun-Jin and took a magnificent bow. Curtain call. He had attained perfection. With blade in hand, he made his way towards Yun-Jin, preparing to tie up loose ends before the credits rolled. But as he reached her, a dark fog enveloped the two of them, whispering dark secrets and showing visions of faraway places. The two were being taken, both to the same place, yet far away from each other. The trickster felt enveloped by the mist, damp, cool, comfortable. The fog showed him the grandest stage of all, an eternal plain of hospitals and temples and forests and slaughterhouses, adorned with hooks sustained by the million eyes that would watch him, run from him, experience him. All he had to do was accept it, become an implement of the fog, and most importantly, make them scream. As for Yun-Jin, she was somewhere else. She had been taken. Bright lights flashed and blinded her. A spotlight had found her in the darkness. Then a crowd erupted, chanting her name. Magnum opus, magnum opus. She smiled and welcomed the darkness. Encore. What a story, eh? Now that we've reached our chilling conclusion, and we now know how our friends arrived to the realm, I'd like to go over a few pieces of the lore that I feel are worth expanding upon. These will be in no particular order. You can consider them generalized thoughts on a few things. Please enjoy. So, first and foremost, I'd like to explain my internal logic for where I've placed certain events in the timeline, and why I believe they happened when they did. Yun-Jin's childhood is a tricky thing, because unlike with Ji-Woon, where there's a lot more fleshed out, it sort of exists to tell you that it happened, and is then never mentioned again, outside of a brief paragraph in one of the tome entries. And even then, it only really says, she liked music as a kid, and her life kinda sucks now. Whereas the initial base lore talks a little bit about her actual family members. We're told that she grows up with parents and a little sister who's about 6 years younger than her. They live a pretty okay life, and then debt catches up with them, and they have to move to what Yun-Jin considers a pretty crummy apartment. There is some nice stuff about her and her sister. She shows a great deal of compassion towards her, holding her as she cries as they lose the house, and singing her songs until she falls asleep. But then she falls off the face of the earth and is never mentioned or thought about again anywhere. She isn't even given a name, so if she has miraculously appeared somewhere else in the multiverse or in any of the other tomes, I'm unaware of it. Actually, having searched it up while trying to find out if I'd missed anything, the only thing that I came across was a Reddit post saying, "Hey, do you guys think MiNA is Yun-Jin's little sister?" Her dad gets the short end of the stick, but her mum at least gets a really nice outfit story of giving her the magpie brooch as a teenager, with Yun-Jin initially rolling her eyes at it, but then seeing magpies on the day she scouts the Trickster. I think it's a really fascinating and obviously ironic turn of fate that she sees magpies as an omen of good luck, when in actuality it's more like an omen of being about to be picked to become a plaything for the entity for the rest of time. Thanks, Mum. I'll touch a bit more upon why I think the family is utilized in this way in the story in a little bit. I decided to use a bit of artistic liberty to utilize Yun-Jin's autumn outfit as the transitionary point in the story between being the producer of No Spin to being the producer of the Trickster. And I did this for a few different reasons. The outfit itself is still stylish, but it's completely unlike the vast majority of her other outfits, which are flamboyant and extravagant. It's a much more somber style of outfit, which is then in line with the actual description of the story, which places her wearing this outfit as extremely recently after the studio fire, as that's what's on her mind, and she tries to distract herself with the relaxing fall scenery. I think it works as a really good do-or-die moment for her, and the flowers work as a really brilliant metaphor for the idea of things dying, but then being born again, as she's about to do with herself and the Trickster. This outfit also follows a trend that I really love with Yun-Jin's flavor text, in that it very often brings out her lonely nature. Many outfits, if she's not working with the Trickster, have her entirely by herself. Her second Tormented Souls outfit, for example, describes her as listening to a song that makes her feel very deeply. And you get this mental image of someone who comes off as very popular and in demand, but then in their personal life has no real contact with others. You can very much picture her penthouse apartment entirely empty, save for her. Her Christmas sweater is another really good example of this, talking about how someone anonymous left it for her, or rather for magnum opus, and that it was the only Christmas present she received that year. For funsies, let's imagine that it was the Trickster who left it for her under an anonymous guise. Not to be kind, but just to remind her that no one else had bothered to get her a present. Yun-Jin's age is heavily debated, and there's no real evidence for it either way. She was conceived and originally designed as someone in their early 50s, but nothing else other than the original idea of it seems to indicate that. She's not exactly a young woman either. She's worked for around 2 decades at Mighty One by the end of the story, if I'm counting correctly. Several of which were obviously with the Trickster. And given she joined at 17, I put her as middle-aged, and just kind of accept the fact that Behavior themselves probably don't really know how old she is. Anyways, I mention her age because she's not just a young adult getting her life together and thus lives alone. She's a grown woman who never had the time to find love or have a family of her own. You don't necessarily need to have a romantic partner or children to be happy or fulfilled. But it clearly is something that weighs on her, even if she doesn't quite realize it. In her new lobby music, added with the comeback chapter, there's a brief few seconds of her very intense electronic pop-style music that slows down to a single solitary piano playing sadly. And it really is just such a wonderful music choice, because it shows how hidden within the depths of her bombastic, super executive lifestyle, underneath all that, there's still loneliness. After her success, her family are never mentioned again, like I touched on earlier, outside of when she reminisces about her childhood during the tome lore. And even then, it's just an implicit mention, given she was living with them at the time. It leads us to believe that she also fell out of regular contact with them too. I don't believe she would have left them high and dry. I'm sure once she started raking in the cash, she helped her parents pay off their debts. But one thing I've always found really telling is the fact that, as far as I'm aware, never at any point does Yun-Jin talk about, for example, her parents or her sister coming to see a Trickster show, or what they think of her music, or her getting them free tickets, or taking them with her on tour. They just are never mentioned again. And I guess that this is because she just legitimately does not allow herself the time to think about personal relationships. She's lonely and doesn't have anyone because of how intensely she works. And her family is a casualty of that. In reality, it's because whatever intern wrote the story in 3 minutes wrote that she had a very sad family and then immediately forgot that that happened. But, you know, that doesn't make for very good lore, does it? On the topic of family, the irony here is that the Trickster, of all people, despite being a psychopath, still thinks very fondly of his family and his time working at his father's restaurant. One of the memories that soothes him during a time of great stress during the tome lore is the memory of being on his father's shoulders at the concert where he discovers that he wants to be an idol. His father is said to love him greatly, and obviously does everything he can to make sure Ji-Woon has the opportunity to succeed in life. And whether or not Ji-Woon loves his father in return, in the traditional sense at least, I'd say he at the very least respects his father for giving him all the tools he needed to start creating his murder art. It should also be pointed out that one of his add-ons is his first ever throwing knife that his father gave to him. And while this is obviously important because he loves knives, I like to believe it also has sentimental value for him because it's from his father. In terms of other intimate relationships, the Trickster seems content being the object of lust for many people, and doesn't ever mention feeling lonely or wanting partnership. Indeed, I don't think he would think about people as being friends or enemies, just people who are better than him and inferior to him, with a great vast majority obviously being inferior in his eyes. I'd say it's not a great stretch to imply that Yun-Jin is indeed as close to a friend as he ever achieves, more so than his bandmates were from No Spin, given that he despised and resented them. Yun-Jin propped him up, brought out, well, not necessarily the best in him, but what he would consider the best, at the very least. Whereas in his eyes, his bandmates only ever took the attention away from him. A lot of the outfits are incredibly vague about exactly when they happened. And it does sometimes get to the point where you do have to wonder if the person writing them is aware of the lore in anything other than a vague idea. For example, Yun-Jin's first Tormented Souls outfit, which was included in the tome just before Tokyo Ghoul came out, has a story of her defending the edgy lyrics from a song from the first No Spin album. Except I'm not completely convinced that it's meant to be from No Spin, and whoever wrote it was probably just assuming that the Trickster and No Spin were the same thing the whole time. I can't explain it, because it's just a hunch. But I really feel it's the case, purely because it's one of the only outfits of hers to supposedly take place before the studio fire. Obviously, Yun-Jin's defaults and one or two of the others can be considered her look before the fire as well, as she was a producer for much longer than, let's say, the Trickster was the Trickster. For example, you wouldn't catch him wearing that long yellow coat before the fire, because this was his new identity look. I just find an outfit from a collection supposedly about tormented souls taking place before anything that actually torments her to be quite silly. I'm fairly sure that Behaviour forgot the outfit exists as well, because they made a second Tormented Souls outfit for her, which does fall much more in line with the melancholy of the collection. And it's of the two, the only one actually in the collection when you go to the collections tab and click on it. It irritates me profoundly. I have no idea why only one of them is in the collection. I suppose it's because the first one is a Rift outfit. So there you go. Given that we're talking about outfits with deceptive dates, the Fire Moon Festival outfits are actually quite interesting because of their descriptions. They aren't really about the outfits themselves or the actual event of wearing them, but more so the fact that No Spin had performed at the Fire Moon Festival previously. So the pair were actually coming back, rather than the Trickster getting the honour of performing at it for the first time by himself. I'm sure that it gave him a massive ego boost to perform something that he'd already performed once before. Presumably much better, in his opinion. The Trickster's murder timeline in his base lore is actually quite tricky, because of course, as the lore is expanded upon, you have entire tomes and outfit descriptions happening between sentences. So you have the paragraph describing Ji-Woon getting more brazen with his murders, and the very last one takes place after they've come back from what would be their final international tour, the one in Brazil. We know this because it's in Yun-Jin's base lore that she mentions that when she hears about the cufflink eye murder, it's after they've just gotten back to Korea. We know that the outfits that reference America, such as New York City or Miami, happened before the tome lore, because those events are mentioned in the tome lore. So while Brazil isn't necessarily the very last place they went, I'd imagine that it was because of the traumatic events that unfold. They'd probably either want to go back to Korea to regroup, or they'd been ordered to by Mighty One. A big problem that I found with the base lore is that it only references a handful of his crimes, in quite an abbreviated fashion. I say that it's a problem. I mean, it's a problem for me, not for the actual lore itself, just in the sense that it doesn't necessarily give you the scale of quite how long they were performing for. But the pair of them are together for several years, at the very least, and it can be assumed that he committed at least one murder for every city they performed in. Or at least that would have been his preferred intent. But anyways, all the doubts that Yun-Jin has about the Trickster are somewhat quelled by the conclusion to the Brazil event. But there's still that lingering doubt caused by her knowledge that the knife Lucas was holding was indeed the Trickster's. But then again, it's that thing where it doesn't prove anything. For example, Lucas could have easily had his own toolkit, but Yun-Jin, halfway through the tome, mentions that she remembers the Trickster saying that he always keeps a blade on his person. So, hypothetically, what could have happened was that Lucas, knowing of the blade, and supposedly being the Trickster superfan stalker, wanted to use his own knife to kill him as a symbolic gesture. I think it's really fun that there's always a plausible deniability that seems from the outside to appear as just, I'm aware he's a lunatic, but I'm going to ignore it because he makes me money. Which is a little bit of it, but it's far from the whole thing. She does genuinely not know, and doubts herself to the point of believing she's making it all up in her head because she's afraid of actually being successful. I think at this point, once they get back to Brazil, there would have been a few weeks of peace. maybe where Yun-Jin feels she can stop the mistakes of the past repeating themselves. And the Trickster, in turn, starts feeling more elated than ever, given that he pulled off one of the most massive rug pulls from beneath everyone's feet. I'm working under the impression that Yun-Jin would have retroactively associated all of the coincidence deaths to Lucas, as that's what would make the most sense in that scenario. And so when they arrive back and there's a few days or weeks with no incidents, she begins to truly believe that she's overcome whatever trauma or self-confidence issues she developed, particularly from the studio fire. But then, of course, it all starts to come crashing down harder than ever, as Trickster keeps sampling torture noises and being more brazen about it, and showing her and the studio. And then, of course, she starts seeing the murders in the news again, and instantly connects it. And it's that thing where it could just be another crazed fan. Maybe they saw the news about Lucas and decided, hey, I'll copycat him. You can create any sort of explanation, I think, when it comes to not wanting to see the worst in someone, especially someone you've revolved your entire life around. But the problem is she trusts her gut, even if she continues to ignore it. And I do think that if she had truly known, she would have put her foot down. There's that element to it as well of, for example, if she 100% knew for a fact that the Trickster was murdering people and cutting them up, I don't even think she knows whether she would do anything about it, because her first and most important goal is to make sure that she doesn't become a washed-up producer that no one cares about. She cares about her career. She mentions at the end of her base lore that the Trickster has taken everything from her by taking her career and taking the lives of all of her colleagues. So I think she wouldn't know. She wouldn't know what she would do. And that's the sort of thing you can just sort of put it off forever, as long as you don't have any concrete proof. Because as long as you can ignore it, you can keep living your life and you don't have to have things change. You don't have to pull another block out of the Jenga tower. So now I think is a good time to start talking about exactly why I've put comeback in the timeline, because I think it does indeed take place after Brazil, a time during which he's still incredibly popular. But obviously, once they get back to Korea, his music just does take a nosedive, and Mighty One has had enough of it. As we see in a cool duality between their two laws, when the studio tells them, right, you've got 3 months to get your shit together and make another hit, or you're out, Ji-Woon actually believes that Yun-Jin defends him fiercely, but is outnumbered. However, we see in her lore that she completely agrees with them, even if she is a bit ticked off, just out of pride, that they're blaming profits going down on her idol in particular. So I think it would have been in this time frame that they'd have heard of Tae-Young's virtual idol company and decided that it was the way of the future. You have to remember that they weren't interested in getting rid of Yun-Jin. She's not the problem, and has only ever made them buckets of cash. So I think, as the producer of the Trickster, she would have been given authority to be the liaison between them, and in turn would have been promoted to MiNA's agent, were the project to be successful as a reward. Yun-Jin is at the MiNA concert in the webcomic, which I've included in the story just for the sake of assuming it happened off-screen in the in-game lore. But there is actually the description of one of the meetings between Tae-Young and Yun-Jin at a cafe, where he requests confidential materials, and she acts pretty bizarrely towards him from his perspective. He isn't by any means a social guy, but that doesn't mean he's socially incompetent. So I think him noticing that she's being weird about the whole thing is probably accurate. It's one of my favorite outfit stories because you can just picture in her mind how anxious she is, because it's such a risk-reward type thing. She's super insistent on knowing exactly how the personality matrix works, because this situation either completely frees her of the Trickster and gives her a completely obedient tool to use in his place, or she ends up with what ultimately does begin happening, which is MiNA copying Trickster too successfully and becoming an insane murderous psychopath. And then she's responsible for not one, but two murderous idols. All in all, Tae-Young's fate of wiping the database and disappearing off the face of the earth with his phone, and in turn MiNA, is actually a really big stroke of luck for Yun-Jin, all things considered, even if that wasn't why Trickster did it. Speaking of Trickster, I think it's absolutely wonderful that he, as an artist, fucking hates MiNA with every fibre of his being. He might be an absolute headcase, psychopath, sadist, but he still ultimately understands the fundamental concept that a robot or artificial intelligence cannot create art. It can only imitate it to varying degrees of success. And MiNA is successful in capturing the eyes of the public, for the little time that she's around at least, because people like what's new and innovative. A lot of people compare her to someone like Hatsune Miku, but as far as I'm aware in the lore, she isn't a Vocaloid or anything of that nature. She's something more akin to Grok's AI companion thing. I can't remember what it's called at the minute, and I refuse to look it up. But it's something to that degree. It is a program designed to say whatever you want it to say, or whatever it thinks, in heavy quotation marks, you want to hear. The only real difference is that it's given a semblance of a corporeal form, via hologram, at the concert, but it's entirely just a program designed to perform songs and give cute answers that'll be appealing to the audience, always within the designated parameters. Obviously, in the fog, the entity gives her a form, which does beg the question of how much genuine sentience she has there. In her outfit description, she mentions her eyes burning, and not only that, but how she'd never had eyes to burn before. She hadn't been capable of sensation. So what I think is happening here is that in the real world, as we'll call it, MiNA is indeed just a personality matrix that's done too good of a job copying its template. But I think the MiNA that's been created in the fog does believe herself to be real. Everything in the fog is supposed to be made up of auric cells. So I believe it's a case similar to, for example, Victor of the twins. Whether Victor was or wasn't actually taken definitely veers towards him being just a recreation of the boy who died, rather than literally being him. but it works in the entity's favor to give these creations their own perception of self. For example, I wouldn't imagine Victor's running around thinking, "Rah, rah, rah. I'm so evil, I'm tricking Charlotte, I'm just a thing." He probably, with his limited understanding of things, does believe himself to be Victor. So in this case, I think that MiNA is actually a real person, if you want to call her that, in the sense that she is indeed based off of the MiNA from Tae-Young's memories, as she's the MiNA that desires him. However, she's been given a body and a sense of self that's derived from more than just code. To wrap up this section of the video, I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship between Yun-Jin and Ji-Woon, because I think the thing that's really fascinating about it is that it both is and isn't for the money and fame, at least on her part. I wouldn't necessarily say that she cares especially about Ji-Woon as an individual person, but rather as what he represents, as she's the principal custodian of his after she lost the rest of the band in the fire. I think a lot of people tend to think about relationships as, oh, she likes him, or oh, she dislikes him, just in general, not this specifically. Whereas I think when you have two characters who are as complex as the Trickster and Yun-Jin, it goes beyond whether they like each other or what purely materialistic or career benefits they can offer each other. They have a symbiotic relationship, even if neither of them necessarily wants to believe it. They are aware of it. For example, we have the most telling moment of this at the end of the base lore again, where Trickster does acknowledge that he'd probably have been resigned to insignificance for his whole life if she hadn't given him the chance to become something more, which is why he gives her his gift of being the singular audience member for his final performance. She's one of the very few people on Earth that the Trickster legitimately has a profound respect for. And every time he doubts or underestimates her, she surpasses his expectations by a mile. Of course, her own flaws catch up to her in the end, because her instincts are razor sharp, but her self-doubt and unwillingness to see the grisly truth are what ultimately lead to her downfall. There are several points in the lore where she has a chance to get bailed out, but every time there's just the right amount of plausible deniability for her to ignore her gut. In the text itself, it's either never or very rarely referenced whether the two have any genuine positive personal feelings for each other. Their relationship, even in their minds, being one more akin to two rivals working together. Two individuals who deeply respect each other as opponents, even if they're working towards the same goal. They force the other to always be at their best. Having said that, while it's not explicitly stated in the text, I do think it would be entirely natural to have a certain degree of personal affection for someone you spend several years touring the globe with, in the same way you'd develop equally a distaste for everything they do because you're forced to spend so much time with them. I think, at least for Yun-Jin, in the text that we have, the closest to her showing genuine personal care for him is at the end of the tome lore, when she's almost in tears at the thought of him having been kidnapped her having been too late to save him. I do think that that is, to a large extent, representative of her overall desire to not repeat the mistakes of the past. But absolutely, I think the last thing in the world she'd want is to see, someone who was effectively a kid when she found them, and to know that at the end of the day, you led them to this fate of being kidnapped and murdered horribly. Of course, their ultimate fates are, depending on how you look at it, much worse than being murdered in a warehouse in Brazil. Something I think is absolutely nuts is when Yun-Jin is taken into the fog. It's really unlike most other survivors, where it's a true scene of horror. Here, she's saved from certain death after having been drugged and forced to witness hours of torture of her colleagues, and brought to her own stage of bright lights, and is actually enticed herself, not dissimilarly to how killers are when they are brought into the realm. She's given the promise of having the chance at payback against the Trickster for taking everything that she had worked her entire life to get. And I think it gives her such a unique motivation in comparison to all these other survivors. As revenge is normally something kept for characters of archetypes similar to that of the Spirit or Sadako, for example. Sadako and the Spirit obviously being good comparisons. The Spirit is promised revenge on the father that murdered her, and the entity promises salvation for Sadako to an extent, helping her escape the well, finally. Yun-Jin is taken from being just a helpless victim at the mercy of the Trickster to getting the chance to fight back against him, even if it is just ultimately prolonging the inevitable. It allows them to continue their metaphorical dance together in perpetuity. I'd like to give a special thanks to the people that gave me kind permission to use their artwork in this video. I've left links to their social media in the description, and I'd really highly recommend you go check them out if you haven't already, as the artwork shown in this video is just a taste of everything else that they've all done. I'll finish off by saying that if you've reached the end of this video, then I'm glad that you've hopefully enjoyed it. As I said at the beginning of the video, this isn't a particularly professional project. It's just one that I've been wanting to make for a long time, as I really enjoy spoken word spooky stories. And I understand that the Dead by Daylight lore, the tomes especially, can be convoluted to navigate and inconvenient to listen to. I didn't want to just upload the already existing tome narrations and call it a day. But there are significant gaps between the lore and often major inconsistencies, so a little imagination is often required to connect the pieces. Whether I succeeded in that or not can be up to you. Although as long as I helped you get some sleep, I'll consider my job done. If you have any recommendations for what you'd like to hear next in terms of lore, then please feel more than free to leave a comment. I'll be sure to give them a look. Sweet dreams, everyone.